Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We're holding this hearing virtually in compliance with the regulations for remote committee proceedings pursuant to House Resolution 965. This is the third virtual subcommittee hearing in the Ways and Means Committee. As with our previous hearings, I want members to know that I plan to continue this committee's long tradition of collegiality and substantive debate, even as we conduct our business from afar. I will continue to work with the ranking member, Mr. Smith, and his staff to ensure that the rights of all members are respected in this new virtual format. And so before I turn to today's important topic, I want to remind members of a few procedures to help you navigate this new platform. First, consistent with regulations, the committee will keep microphones muted to limit background noise. Members are responsible for unmuting themselves when they seek recognition or when recognized for their 5-minute statement. Second, members and witnesses must have their cameras on at all times. If you need to step away from the proceedings, please leave your camera on rather than logging out. Finally, we have several members who are waving on to the subcommittee for today's hearing. Given the large number, I will recognize members in an order that represents a balanced ratio, beginning with members on the subcommittee. And I understand that Mr. Smith does not wish to be the first Republican member to ask questions. I thank all of you for your continued patience as we navigate this technology in order to continue serving our country together in this great time of need. Without objections, Representative Don Beyer is authorized to serve as the chair today in the event that I experience any technical difficulties and can't stay connected. And with that, I'll now turn to the important topic of today's hearing: restaurants in America during the COVID-19 pandemic. America's restaurants and restaurant workers are a resilient force. They've weathered past recessions and fought their way back after hurricanes and wildfires. But the challenges they face now are unlike anything that's come before. Restaurants and other places where we gather, like theaters, arenas, and concert halls, are equally vulnerable or uniquely vulnerable to the current public health crisis. They're places we meet up together, where we celebrate and congregate with friends and family. Social distancing is a public health necessity, but it cuts at the heart of an industry all about taking care of people by bringing them together. And that's not where the industry's challenges end. Restaurants are making dining spaces safer for their guests and employees, working to comply with the evolving public health guidance and facing a hit to outdoor dining as weather changes. These costs add up and are tough to absorb in an industry where profit margins of 3 to 5% are the norm. And that's before additional costs are added by tariffs and other factors. The toll the virus is taking on restaurants is reverberating throughout the economy. So far, COVID has claimed over 30,000 restaurants. It's leveled such a direct hit that 1 in 4 unemployed Americans today are restaurant workers. This was an unforeseeable catastrophe. Before the pandemic, the restaurant industry was booming, with over 1 million establishments nationwide employing over 15 million people. And the restaurant workforce is hit just as hard, if not harder, than the owners. Restaurant work is tough, and the industry is full of tenacious, young, strong people. Restaurant workers are disproportionately young and people of color, and restaurants employ more than 1 million single moms. These jobs disappeared through no fault of the restaurant workers, many of whom want to be back at work as soon as it's safe. They need our support. I'm proud of the pandemic relief measures that this committee and other committees passed to support restaurants and the workers whose jobs disappeared. The employee retention tax credit, the $1,200 checks, and the $600 expanded federal unemployment benefit all helped. They weren't perfect, but they did a lot of good. When we passed those bills, we didn't know how long the virus would interrupt our economy. We weren't sure how deep the recession would dip. We hoped that the virus would be better contained by now and that the economy would be in better condition, but they're not. America's restaurants and restaurant workers need another relief package. America needs another relief package. The House passed just such a measure on the 15th of May. The HEROES Act would approve another expanded round of stimulus checks and continue the $600 per week federal unemployment supplement. It would improve the PPP and employee retention tax credit. It would help restaurants make rent through a tax credit that I led, the Keeping the Lights On Act. But the Senate has wasted more than 4 months. We have to act now to save this industry before it's too late. 85% of independent restaurants may go under before the end of the year if more federal relief doesn't come. This is unthinkable. Restaurants make enormous contributions to our economy and our labor market. But they do more than that. They make our neighborhoods more walkable and vibrant. They help us get acquainted with other cultures and get in touch with our own roots. They give us space to celebrate our lives and even just take our mind off of our daily difficulties. In my district, they're an integral part of our community. Restaurants are fighting to survive, and we need to stand with them. I'd like to warmly welcome all the witnesses who are joining us today and thank you for what you do. And with that, I would like to recognize the ranking member, Mr. Smith of Nebraska, for the purposes of an opening statement. Mr. Smith, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to express my frustration. I am frustrated that we are having another hearing under the auspices of the Select Revenue Subcommittee. While it is important information that we will hear, I think it's important to note that a majority of what we will hear from our witnesses today will have almost nothing to do with what is in our subcommittee's jurisdiction. I'm frustrated that even though we're holding this as a subcommittee hearing, so many Democrats are waving in to come here to talk about their political priorities, issues which really aren't in our jurisdiction. Given this intense interest, perhaps we could have a constructive full committee hearing on topics within the full committee's jurisdiction, like discussing tax measures such as the employee retention credit, economic relief payments, and other issues like the impact of enhanced unemployment benefits on workers and employers. But I'm most frustrated by the primary reason we are here. The Democratic leadership seems to prefer organizing these messaging opportunities for members over coming to the table to have a serious conversation about how to most effectively defeat this disease and reopen our economy. Even as we meet, it appears the Speaker's primary interest is holding show votes on another partisan package which will accomplish nothing to help hurting Americans, just so that the Speaker's members can go home and tell their constituents that they did something, even though really nothing was done. It's time to actually start working. As I said the last time we met, Republicans have ideas on how to help our workers recover. We are committed to defeating the disease and safely reopening our economy. We know there are many areas where we can have bipartisan agreement. We are frustrated, just as I know many of our Democratic colleagues are frustrated by the willingness of the Speaker to hold hostage assistance we agree should be passed on a bipartisan basis. We saw this willingness over the summer when she declined the President's offer to extend enhanced unemployment benefits and continue negotiating a bipartisan COVID package. We saw it this week when she pulled out of a bipartisan CR agreement, risking a government shutdown to hold hostage aid to farmers in my district, along with ranchers and ag producers and hungry families. We see it every time she begins a conversation about COVID aid by demanding a dollar figure rather than sharing actual priorities for resuming a healthy, open United States of America. We must do better. Essential workers, including those who work in our restaurants, deserve real action, and our witnesses can testify to that. I want to thank our witnesses for being here today. Restaurants are vital to our economy. They provide economic opportunity for people of all ages. They provide millions of jobs. My district is #1 in the nation in ag production, and in Nebraska, we understand that adding value to agriculture is as important or more important than the initial production. You all do immense work adding value to what we grow. Thank you for doing what you do. Restaurants, their cooks, servers, bartenders, hosts, others need assistance, and I hope we can have a constructive conversation about ways we can help within this subcommittee's jurisdiction, such as assistance with cleaning and safety costs or adjusting the employee retention tax credit. We must also keep in mind that restaurants aren't the only sector of our economy hurting because of restrictions on travel and public gatherings. Hotels, theaters, gyms, and sporting venues are just a few of the other industries impacted. I would like to ask unanimous consent to include in the record a letter from the National Franchisee Association and several hotel and lodging associations in support of continuing access to the payroll protection program.
Without objection, such will be the order.
Thank you. Before I yield back, I would like to also ask unanimous consent to include Ranking Republican Brady's opening remarks in the record.
Without objection, such will be the order.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. I'm proud that our committee chairman is joining us today. His unwavering commitment to the restaurant and hospitality industry in Western Massachusetts is well known and outstanding. I yield 5 minutes to the chairman for any remarks that he would like to make. Chairman Neal, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Thompson and Ranking Member Smith. And a special note again to you, Mike, for hosting this important hearing. I think we're all united in one common purpose today, and that's the recognition and the acknowledgement that until we defeat this virus, we are not going to enter into a full economic recovery. These restaurants are hurting throughout my district in central and western Massachusetts and all over the country in urban and rural areas. My heart goes out to those owners and their employees and the communities they serve and indeed sustain. Restaurants are familiar neighborhood anchors where people gather not just for a good meal or a place to connect with families and friends, but they're important job creators. Everybody on this committee should be dismayed by the testimony that was offered by the chairman of the Federal Reserve Board. Nobody looks at the Federal Reserve Board and says there are Democrats and Republicans. His testimony now, as it was before we wrote the CARES Act, was profound. What he suggested was that the economy is in need of a major infusion of liquidity. We should all be united around that testimony. Secretary Mnuchin reinforced what Federal Reserve Chairman Jay Powell had to say. Speaker Pelosi's position on this has been entirely consistent with that testimony. For me, places like the Student Prince, Red Rose in Springfield, or Mazzio's in Pittsfield, the Munich House or the Lucky Strike in Chicopee, or in Williamstown, where Meze Bistro and Bar was co-founded by one of my constituents, Nancy Thomas, they're all making the same argument and plea. When the COVID-19 led to stay-at-home orders and social distancing, it had a cataclysmic effect on our nation's restaurants and their workers. Currently, restaurants contribute to 1 in 4 job losses from the COVID-19 shutdown. Even establishments that have hung on are facing cuts to wages and hours. You know how difficult it is in that industry to retain employees. The Payroll Protection Program, as part of the CARES Act, provided a financial lifeline to businesses and an incentive for restaurant owners to keep their workers. Alone in my district, 800 PPP loans were distributed to restaurants that totaled close to $68 million and saved 14,000 jobs. Many restaurant workers are women and people of color who are often marginalized, and this program provided peace of mind for them and their families. I'm proud of the work that the Commonwealth of Massachusetts has done to thoughtfully reopen restaurants across the Commonwealth. I speak with Governor Baker almost every day about the need for additional assistance. And on Saturday night, we spent an hour on the phone discussing this very matter. And I hope to report to him over this weekend that Congress is paying attention to the requests that he has made. It's a good example of how to move forward with properly public guidelines that we need to follow. But more is needed to help our nation's struggling restaurants. We need to continue to remember that this, more than anything else, is a health crisis. And our nation's economy will not bounce back until we beat it, which is with us until it is safe and effective to embrace a vaccine as well. Since March, the Ways and Means Committee has taken substantial steps not only to combat the public health crisis, but to support American workers and keep our economy afloat. Remember, with the CARES Act, only 5 members of the House of Representatives voted against the CARES Act. Many of those efforts we tried to replicate and have included in the HEROES Act, and it would help owners and their employees from restaurants as well. It significantly increases the employee retention tax credit, which I will press for as we proceed to new negotiations. And it makes it more applicable to employers and types of expenses. The Ways and Means staff has estimated that up to 63 million workers could receive assistance by vigorously embracing the employee retention tax credit. This boosts the PPP as well, and it will help employers continue to pay their employees. The HEROES Act also expands paid sick leave and paid family and medical leave. It also helps clearly the Families First Act that we have embraced at the end of 2021. It provides another round of economic impact payments and expansions of child care and refundable credits, helping struggling workers and their families. These are reasonable, effective relief measures, and they go a long way to help alleviate more restaurant closures and help workers who are desperate for support and assurance. This is the biggest crisis that the restaurant industry has ever faced, and the ripple effect will be felt through other jobs that support restaurants like food supply chains, farmers, fishermen, and indeed truck drivers. In my district, it's had a double impact. Tanglewood in the Berkshires canceled their season, and many of the area restaurants were impacted because of it. The effects will be felt all going into this fall season, when many tourists, usually by the tens and hundreds of thousands, flock to the area. The restaurant industry and those that support it need certainty now more than ever. We have an obligation to help them, and that includes the infusion of more money into our economy. The HEROES Act provides that. I applaud Mike Thompson again, as chairman, for his leadership on these important issues. And I want to remind all what I said earlier, the Federal Reserve Board is not comprised of Democrats and Republicans. The testimony that was offered 2 days ago by Jay Powell should have a profound impact on these deliberations. These restaurants simply need help. So thanks to you, Mike, for holding this hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Without objection, all members' opening statements will be made part of the record. Thank you to our distinguished witnesses for taking the time to appear before us today to discuss this very important issue. First, we have Mayor Buddy Dyer of Orlando, Florida. Mayor Dyer is the city of Orlando's longest-serving mayor, having served continuously since his first election in 2003. And one of the longest serving big city mayors in the United States. Before holding public office, Mayor Dyer worked as an environmental engineer. Sonda Bernstein is the proprietor of the Girl and the Fig restaurant in Sonoma, California, the Fig Cafe and Wine Bar in Glen Ellen, California, and an event space, full service catering company and food truck. She's also a cookbook author and has a podcast dedicated to food. Christine Ha is the chef and proprietor of the Blind Goat restaurant in Bravery Chef Hall in Houston, Texas. This is Ms. Ha's first restaurant after winning season 3 of Master Chef in 2012, an accomplishment made even more notable due to her permanent blindness. Ms. Ha suffers from a result of an autoimmune disease. Following her televised win, she authored a New York Times best-selling cookbook, co-hosted a cooking show, and served as a judge of Master Chef Vietnam. Mario Sandoval has worked as a food server in Binion's Steakhouse in Las Vegas for 35 years. He has been a member of the Culinary Workers Union, Local 226 in Las Vegas since 1982, joining when he was just 16 years old. Saru Jaharuma is president of One Fair Wage, co-author of the Restaurant Opportunity Center United, and director of the Food Laboratory Research Center at the University of California at Berkeley. Melvin Rodrigue is the 2020 chairman of the National Restaurant Association and president and CEO of Galatoire's restaurant in New Orleans and Baton Rouge, Louisiana. The New Orleans location has been in business since 1905. He's a former president of the Louisiana Restaurant Association. Each of your statements will be made part of the record in its entirety. I would ask that you summarize your testimony in 5 minutes or less. To help you with that time, there's a clock on the screen. If you go over your time, I will notify you with a tap of the gavel or the marking pen. Thank you all again for being here. And Mayor Dyer, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Chairman Neal, Chairman Thompson, Ranking Member Smith, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. My name is Buddy Dyer. For the last 17 years, I've had the privilege of serving as the mayor of the great city of Orlando. Most of you probably know Orlando is the world's #1 destination for visitors, but we also like to say Orlando is one of the best places to live, work, learn, play, and run a small business. In many ways, Orlando is America's new melting pot, a regional community where more than 1,000 new residents join us every single week, seeking unmatched quality of life and unparalleled access to opportunity. And there's quite honestly no better example of the strength that comes from our diversity and how we work to create opportunity than our restaurants. Plain and simple, Orlando is a restaurant town. We're home to the headquarters of some of the most iconic brands in the world, including Darden, Red Lobster, Ruth's Chris. We also boast popular emerging independent brands such as Four Rivers Barbecue and Hawker's Asian Street Fare. Equally important, we're home to a vibrant downtown and many Main Street small districts that are quarters that are filled with family-owned restaurants whose owners are living the American dream every single day, making incredible food, adding to the unique and diverse culture of our city, while providing our residents with places to make memories with friends and family while sharing a meal. Our restaurant scene is why Chicago Tribune and other publications have begun citing Orlando as among the best foodie cities in America. So our restaurants and the ecosystem that supports them are a vital part of our local economy. They're a foundational part of our culture. And today I'm here on behalf of these diverse restaurants and everyone who's part of it. I'm here on behalf of our Main Street small business owners in Orlando, small businesses all across America, and I'm here to deliver a distress call. Our restaurants are in trouble and they need your help. On a local level, we've partnered with our restaurants to think outside the box over the last several months to help them with ways to stay afloat during the crisis. We've expanded outdoor dining into parking lots and sidewalks and parks. We've turned many of our city streets into restaurant parklets. We've expanded carryout alcohol sales. We've done everything that we can think of from a local government standpoint. And at this point, more than 1/3 of our restaurant workforce has been laid off or furloughed, or operators don't know when or if they'll even be able to bring them back. So our restaurants need your help. Distinguished members of the subcommittee, I wish each of you could take a walk with me through one of our small business districts and you'd meet so many great people. You'd hear powerful stories about what it means to put everything you have into a business, into a dream. And right now you'd hear stories of perseverance and strength. You'd hear what it's like to have worked harder than you ever thought possible to endure the last 7 months of a pandemic in order to keep your business open and employees on staff. You'll hear how much they want to operate safely. And finally, you'll hear desperation, what it's like to be scared about the future and not know how much longer you can hold on. I know Congress and the administration are currently debating various ways to help restaurant owners survive this pandemic. And when I talk to restaurateurs in my community, they're pretty clear on what type of need they have. Expansion and increased flexibility of the PPP, expansion of the employee retention tax credit that I know this committee is considering, tax credits to help with the unexpected cost of personal protective equipment to safeguard the health of their employees and customers alike. Those are three big things that can help those businesses, and by association, the town centers and communities that make it, are trying to make it through these most difficult times. There will be a time when this pandemic is over and life returns to normal, but for so many people, that return to normal will involve being able to once again gather at a restaurant without fear or worry. But the thing is, if we don't act now to help our restaurants endure this crisis, there may not be restaurants to go back to. And that's not an exaggeration. That's reality on Main Street America right now. I implore you to put partisan differences aside and work together to help our restaurants. I thank you for your time today.
Thank you for your testimony, Mayor. Ms. Bernstein, you may proceed.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you having me today. Ladies and gentlemen, I've been in the hospitality for almost 40 years. I started as a server with TGI Fridays and eventually traveled around the country opening up their new restaurants. And I just fell in love with the restaurant business. I thought I was going to be a photographer, but I just loved being with people. I loved serving food. I loved feeling like I was having a party every day. I decided that I was going to do everything I could to work towards having my own business. And in 1997, I opened my first restaurant. It's 40 seats. And we started with 17 employees, staff members, family members. And it was such a whirlwind. I think about the adrenaline of opening a restaurant, and it was my favorite part. It was so exciting. Today, 23 years later, my business is still there. I've worked really hard to expand it with other operations, including catering. And right before the pandemic, we had 240 employees. I shut down before the mandate because I was really concerned about our employees getting sick, our guests getting sick, and really not understanding what was going on. So we just shut the doors, tried to think about what we were going to do, and we ended up laying off 170 of our team members. Really family members, people that have worked really hard for us as a restaurant in our community. And anyway, heartbreaking. It took a little while. So grateful for the PPP. Obviously, there were some issues in the beginning of trying to use that money within 8 weeks, and was so grateful that some of those things could be changed so that it could extend it. We have since used our money. The money is gone. We've been able to retain 75, 80 employees, and we're in a beautiful season right now. It's wine country summer, outdoor season. Our town too has given us some allowances to expand into the sidewalks and even our park plaza, and we're doing absolutely everything we can to stay afloat. We know that if we are mean and lean, we can maybe get through till spring, but I never would have thought that today we would still be in the midst of the pandemic. I know there are such great programs, the tax retention credit, the Restaurant Act that the Restaurant Coalition, Independent Coalition is working on. There are so many great programs that are out there. We need help like yesterday. Once winter happens and we can't serve outside, we're going to have to lay off another 60 people. I don't know, honestly, I don't know how my dream of what I've done for all these years is going to disintegrate. I miss our guests gathered around the table. I miss hearing our staff. I miss hearing the kitchen yell for runners to come get the food and so many other things. And most of all, I'm so grateful for all of you to take the time and to consider the restaurant business. I am one of so many small businesses, and I know the pain that I'm feeling. I can imagine that everybody else is feeling the same pain. The other thing I want to note really quickly is that we're a trickle-down business. And so if we're not doing business, then we're not buying from our farmers, we're not buying from our winemakers, we're not buying from the ranchers. And in our catering, where we lost over 50 weddings this catering season, the photographers and the DJs and the bands and the florists and the cake makers and all these people lost that business too. And so it comes down to celebration and memories and having the gap. Instead of creating these beautiful times, we're in panic and we're in fear, and we just are scared of the invisible pandemic that is happening around us that we have absolutely no control in. So thank you. I really, really appreciate you putting the effort in, and I'm grateful for you giving me an opportunity to speak.
Sandra, thank you very much. Ms. Ha, you're recognized. Please proceed.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee and everyone that's attending. Just thank you so much for this opportunity to testify before you today. I'll tell you a little bit about my story. My name is Christine Ha. My parents were Vietnamese refugees that came here on a U.S. naval ship on April 29, 1975. They escaped Saigon one day before the imminent fall. They came here to America to make a better life for themselves. And I was born in Southern California, raised in Texas. So growing up in Texas, I was straddling these two different cultures. We ate a lot of Vietnamese food at home back then, when things like oxtail and pork belly were cheap cuts of meat that were not yet trendy. That was what my parents could afford. And my mom did a great job of cooking these ingredients and making them into tasty meals that fed our family and took them a long way. Fast forward several years, I was in college. I actually never learned to cook from my mom. She passed away when I was 14. I miss the foods of my youth and the flavors of these Vietnamese foods that my mom cooked. So I taught myself how to cook in college. And when I first cooked a meal that my roommates and my friends enjoyed, it was totally worth it. All of the sweat in the kitchen and the smell of fish sauce and onions and things, but I was able to feed my friends. And there was something about the joy of being able to create something and feed other people and welcome them to my table in my small little West Campus apartment, that made me feel like the joy of cooking. And so I kept at it and just became an avid home cook. Um, Coincidentally, in my 20s, around the same time that I was starting to excel at cooking, I began to lose my vision. It's due to an autoimmune disease called neuromyelitis optica that affects the optic nerves and the spinal cord. So I had to leave my corporate job eventually and just focus on my health and recovery. And it was at that time that I decided to do a career change. And I went back to school to get a master's degree in creative writing at University of Houston. So there I was in grad school. At the same time, I decided to audition for a show called MasterChef, which is a show for home cooks, for amateur home cooks, because that's what I was. And as a writer, I just thought that I wanted to experience as much as I could in life. And I thought I would, go get to meet Gordon Ramsay and come home and not win the competition, but have a great story to write about. But lo and behold, being the only blind contestant in this competition was thought of as a disadvantage. But I kind of just, if anything, my parents had taught me, being, survivors of a war, leaving a country behind, all that they knew behind to come and make a new life in America was perseverance and grit. And so I just, did my best in the competition. And in 2012, I did win season 3. Fast forward 7 years after that, in last year, July 2019, I got to open my very first restaurant called The Blind Goat in Houston. We are a 400 square foot station inside a food hall in downtown Houston. It's my first foray into the true restaurant industry. At The Blind Goat, we serve not a traditional Vietnamese menu, but it is very much a tribute to my mother's cooking, a lot of the traditional flavors I grew up eating, but of course with a Texas twist since I grew up here in Texas. So there's a little bit of barbecue, a little bit of Tex-Mex, but a lot of Vietnamese flavors. As soon as we opened the doors, The Blind Goat was fortunately slammed. We were very, very busy. running out of food every day. People, I guess, were still very interested and curious to know what my cooking tasted like since I was declared a winner of a show several years before. So we were very fortunate to feed a lot of people. We brought a lot of joy to people, not only our staff, but guests and our community. On December 31st of 2019, the Houston Chronicle restaurant critic Allison Cook gave the Blind Goat 3 stars. And a few weeks after that, I found out that we were named on the long list for the James Beard Foundation Best New Restaurant in America. Never in a million years did I think I myself, a blind home cook, would be able to run a business, start it from the ground up, and be, named for such an honor. And then, of course, we all remember in mid-March was when the country started shutting down. And on March 16th, my restaurant, The Blind Goat, immediately pivoted to takeout and delivery. We had to scale back hours for the safety of my staff. We closed our doors, for dine-in and all that. And then we really bulked up on PPE. Eventually, we put plexiglass up. I just want to say that my staff is just, the PPP, thank God, has really helped us survive. But we need things like the Restaurant Act to really continue to just help them survive and help the business survive. So I just thank you and urge all of you to consider legislation to help restaurants like mine, independent ones, continue to survive this pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ah. It was a very inspiring story. Thank you for sharing it with us. Mr. Sandoval, you're recognized. Please proceed.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mario Sandoval. I'm a food server at Binion's on Fremont Street, downtown Las Vegas. I've been a culinary union member for 39 years. Today, I'm here to talk to you about how cuts to healthcare and unemployment have affected my life, how workers must be protected when they return to work, and how job security and the right to return to our jobs when businesses reopen can give me and thousands of workers in Nevada the hope we need to get through this pandemic. I was raised here in Las Vegas. I started working downtown Las Vegas when I was 16 years old. I've been working at the same job I have now since I've been 21. I've seen the economy go through changes during 9/11, the 2008 recession, and I've personally walked the picket line without pay. But I've never been through an economic situation like this before. Right now, I'm receiving unemployment benefits because my workplace is still not open. The extra $600 payment on top of my regular unemployment payment helped me survive through most of the year. Now the extra $600 was not renewed, and I'm in a $750 a month deficit on my bills every month. My daughter took on the extra burden to pay my bills because I didn't have the money, but it's put her in a difficult place. I'm worried about the economy crashing again. We can't get a job in this town right now, and some of our workplaces have not opened. So what do we do? Not only do we need unemployment benefits extended, we need a regular stimulus check to be sent to every person in this country to help us get through this pandemic. We also need to make sure that all workers have the right to return to their jobs when businesses reopen or resume. Right now, my coworkers and I are fighting for the right to return to work in Clark County, where fabulous Las Vegas is located. We're urging our county commissioners to pass an ordinance that would protect workers like us who have lost our jobs to COVID. It costs the companies nothing to bring us back to work. Companies should not waste time and money trying to hire and train new people when there are people like me with so much experience just waiting for our workplace to open. We should not be replaced for younger workers when we've spent our lives working for our companies. We shouldn't have to start our careers over. We are so close to retiring with dignity. Knowing that I have a job to return to would give me hope, and hope that I can take, and hope can take me a long ways. We help build our industry. The least the industry can do for us is save our jobs. All workers, union, non-union, need the right to return to work. All workers need help and hope. All workers also need the highest safety standard when they return to work. My union fought for workers like me to be protected if we get called back to work by passing the first in the nation work safety regulation about COVID-19. I know that if my company calls me, they will have to follow strict laws that will have free COVID testing, days off for quarantine if I'm exposed, and that my workplace will be inspected often by the health district. I think workers across the nation should have that kind of protection. Last, but definitely not least, I'm worried about health insurance coverage. When I went on strike in the 90s, it was because I needed health insurance for my children. Right after that strike ended, I found out that I had brain cancer and I needed that insurance for myself. Now I've been in remission 29 years, but I have other health conditions that require me to take medicine every day. I need Congress to make sure that COBRA benefits are 100% covered, especially in a crisis we are facing right now is due to a deadly disease. Workers need Congress to work on policies that will protect us. Please do the right thing and make sure working families in America can pay their bills, stay in their homes, and have health care during a deadly pandemic. Please work on policies that guarantee workers the right to return to work when business resumes, and policies that make them safer if they get called back. That would give working families like mine hope, and we really need that hope right now. So I want to say to you, thank you for the opportunity to share my story. Thank you again.
Thank you, Mr. Sandoval. Now we'll hear from Ms. Jayarama. You may proceed.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Thompson, Ranking Member Smith, and Chairman Neal for inviting me, to all the other witnesses for your moving testimony. Thank you all for your work on tax credits and stimulus checks to support this industry. My name is Sarah Jayaraman. I'm a professor at UC Berkeley. I have led a national organization fighting to raise wages and working conditions in the restaurant industry for the last 20 years. We have 220,000 restaurant worker members, 850 restaurant owner members, including Tom Colicchio, who testified with you last week, and several thousand consumer members across the country. We are definitely in crisis as an industry, and it is heartbreaking to hear employers losing their dreams, losing their businesses. Of course, it's sad for consumers to lose their favorite neighborhood restaurants. But beyond all of that, it is life-threatening for workers, 13.6 million workers who, beyond losing their dreams and their work, they are losing their homes, they are losing their ability to feed their children, they are losing the ability to pay for heat and other utilities with winter coming. It is a very dire, life-threatening situation for millions of workers who are literally facing homelessness right now. The restaurant industry prior to the pandemic was in crisis for workers. We were the nation's second largest and fastest growing employer, but with the absolute lowest paying wages of any employer in the United States. And that is due to the sub-minimum wage for tipped workers, which is a literal legacy of slavery. The industry trade lobby at emancipation demanded the right to hire newly freed slaves, not pay them anything, and have them live entirely on tips, which was a mutation of the original concept of tipping, which was always intended to be an extra or a bonus on top of the wage. Slavery in the United States made the sub-minimum wage for tipped workers, made tipping a replacement for a wage rather than an extra or a bonus on top of the wage. And we ended up with today, we went from a $0 wage at emancipation to a $2.13 wage in our industry for tipped workers today, a $2 increase over 150 years. And prior to the pandemic, that ridiculously low wage led to home insecurity, food insecurity, economic insecurity, the highest rates of sexual harassment of any industry in the United States, because you had a largely female workforce having to tolerate inappropriate customer behavior to feed their families and tips, and severe racial segregation and discrimination. Workers of color have long been tipped less than white workers, and this resulted in a $5 per hour wage gap between Black women and white men as a result of this $2 wage that existed in our industry. So it was wrong, it was outrageous, it was unjust before the pandemic. With the pandemic, it became an issue of life or death. because there are 7 states that got rid of this system many decades ago, including California, Oregon, Washington, Nevada, Minnesota, Montana, and Alaska. They are booming. They had industries that were doing much better than the 43 states with a sub-minimum wage for tipped workers, higher industry job growth rates, higher rates of tipping. But in the 43 states with a sub-minimum wage for tipped workers, our calculations based on 220,000 workers who applied to us for relief was that 60% of tipped workers were unable to access unemployment insurance, 60%, because they were told that their sub-minimum wage plus tips was too low to qualify for benefits in their states. They were also largely unable to access the federal $600 because in many cases, state denials made it very difficult to then access federal funding coming through state systems. So many were left without income. Thousands were actually destitute. You may have seen reports of workers now living in parks. There's a very, very dire situation. Now, millions are being called back to work for a sub-minimum wage of $2 or $3 in most states when tips are down 50 to 75%. And we are facing a public health crisis because the same workers who are being asked to enforce social distancing and mask rules as we switch to indoor dining are being made to rely on tips from those very same customers in order to feed their family. So one of 2 things is going to happen. Either they are going to enforce the rules and not get tips to feed their families, or more likely, they are not going to enforce the rules because they need the tips to feed their families. There is a very severe public health crisis when the CDC has reported that last week that you are twice as likely to get the crisis from eating in a restaurant. If we expect these workers to enforce social distancing, we need to make sure they have the pay that they need to enforce those social distancing rules, not having to rely on tips. So we thank you so much for all of the tax credits, the childcare tax credits, so many other important programs. We'd ask you to consider tax credits for employers who are now, hundreds of them, actually transitioning to a full minimum wage with tips on top. Consider actually extending the 45B FICA tax credit to service charges. So many employers right now want to switch to a full minimum wage with service charges, but want those service charges treated as tips in tax credits as opposed to something different. So there's so much you can do to support literally thousands of restaurant owners across the country that want to change this system, that want to move to a full minimum wage for tipped workers, and millions of tipped workers depend on that transition. Thank you.
Professor, thank you very much. Mr. Rodrigue, you are recognized. Please proceed. Mr. Rodrigue, are you there?
Good morning, Chairman Thompson,
Thank you.
Ranking Member Smith, members of the committee, and 2 fellow witnesses for their time this morning. Thank you. I'm Melvin Rodrigue, president of Galatoire's Restaurant in New Orleans, Louisiana. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for mentioning our founding in 1905. That's special to me. As you might imagine, the stakes are high for us, as well as my fellow restaurateurs across the country. I'm also currently the sitting chair of the National Restaurant Association, and I'm very appreciative of you holding this hearing and inviting me to testify this morning. Before I begin, let me congratulate the newest member of the committee, Congressman Cedric Richmond. He'll be a fantastic addition, and all of us here in Louisiana, his constituency, are proud of his continued achievements. What we're facing at Galatoire's is similar to challenges facing restaurants of every type in every corner of the country. Limited capacities, limited demand, and only half of our 160 employees are back to work. While this hearing is looking at the industry from a longer perspective, we cannot ignore that what happens in the short term will help or hurt our ongoing efforts and could very well potentially determine our future. Restaurant owners are making business decisions for October based on the actions that you all take today. I implore you, please take action before leaving town for the elections. If Congress adjourns without galvanizing an industry-specific restaurant recovery fund, extending the Paycheck Protection Program with a second round, or providing other enhanced relief, more restaurants will close, more employees will lose their jobs, and the economic crisis of the pandemic will deepen. I remind you, there is no industry that has been hit harder. First to close, last to reopen, an industry that relies on social interaction during a time of social distancing. In the restaurant industry, the landscape is stark. 1 in 6 restaurants are closed. 40% of those still open are likely to close within the next 6 months without additional federal aid. And the industry is on track to lose $240 billion in revenue this year. In my state alone, the industry has lost more than 31,000 jobs, half of the pre-pandemic workforce. PPP and other relief was designed for 8 weeks. 6 months in, we're still months away from recovery. Restaurants have suffered more losses in dollars and jobs than any other restaurant. What restaurants and employees need is targeted help for the nation's second largest private sector employer. Our blueprint for economic revival outlines tools that enjoy bipartisan support. Congress should pass the Senate version of the Restaurants Act, which takes a balanced approach to support independent and locally owned franchised restaurants. In addition to the PPP enhancements I just mentioned, Congress should ensure that businesses' expenses paid from it are tax deductible. We ask that Congress enact a refundable tax credit to sustain social distancing facilities, equipment, and safety amidst a crippling operating climate. And Congress should take steps to enhance the amount, duration, and number of businesses that can use the employee retention tax credit. Helping restaurants will benefit every community in this country. Restaurants and our employees have a personal connection with customers, as you know. In other towns, it is a small chain. In some towns, it's a beloved local restaurant. But every one of you and every American has a place that is their favorite, regardless of the name on the door. Restaurants are community cornerstones that provide a ladder of opportunity for employees. Restaurants have more diversity in our ranks and more women and diverse managers and owners than any other sector in the economy. The hospitality we share is a direct result of the world of faces who invite all Americans to their table. Your help can support us in this crisis as we continue our efforts for recovery. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Without objections, each member will be recognized for 5 minutes to question our witnesses. We will not observe the Gibbons rule in this remote setting and will instead go in order of seniority, switching between majority and minority members. Members are reminded to unmute yourselves when you're recognized for your 5 minutes, and I'll begin by recognizing myself. Mayor Dyer, like countless other state and local officials across our country, you've had to thread the needle of protecting the health of your constituents while providing the opportunity to protect their economic livelihoods. When 85% of independent restaurants are in danger of closing and restaurant workers make up 1 in 4 coronavirus-related job losses, how do you anticipate the pandemic to affect the economy of Orlando in both the short run and the long run without additional relief from our federal government?
Well, we're substantially impacted, not necessarily the revenues to the city of Orlando, but the revenues that are in the pockets of our citizens. We've had to balance the needs of restaurants with health. Right now, it's a state-determined capacity issue. They're limited to 50% capacity. So as a city, what we have done is thought of every unique way that we could help restaurants. We've allowed them to use their private parking lots or public spaces that are adjacent to their restaurants to expand their capacity. We've done 15-minute parking spaces. We've done parklets where we turn parking spaces into outdoor dining. But if you look in our downtown right now, I would say 20% of the office towers are occupied, which means there's no lunchtime crowd for restaurants in our downtown. So it really bleeds into every aspect of our community.
So do you need federal help
Absolutely. No,
And what
no
happens if that doesn't come?
What's that? So,
What happens if the federal help does not come?
more and more of these restaurants and small businesses will close. People will be out of work.
More than just the restaurant community.
Absolutely.
And what
Lots of-
happens as a local leader or local elected, if your coffers dry up, what do you do to balance the books?
Well, in Florida, local governments are largely funded by property taxes. So the property tax rates were set before the pandemic hit. So we're going to be okay for this current year. But the next few years, if property values decline, which in an extended long-term downturn of the economy is likely to occur, we would be in a different state than we are right now.
I understand that, but how will you react? What can a city government do?
We'd have to cut services. You can't raise taxes on people while you're in a pandemic situation. So we would have to cut services.
So you lay people off and cut services. So it's a double hit to your constituents. Not only do they lose the economics in their community, but they turn around and have more people unemployed and have less services.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Thank you. Ms. Bernstein, restaurant owners invest significant time and resources, and we've heard the very compelling stories to this today in opening and maintaining your establishments, having factored in the number of customers that you need to serve to break even and the capacity in order to do that. Can you help educate the committee on what operating at reduced capacity means to a restaurant owner such as yourself, and how you've adjusted operations in the interest of public health?
Yes. So year to date, we have seen 100,000 less guests than last year at this time. We have 9 tables in a space that we used to have 25 tables. On a Saturday, there would be 10 servers, 2-3 hosts, 2 bussers, full kitchen. Now we have 2 servers on that same shift. So we are definitely down. We're working at about 30% capacity to what we were. Our catering business is at about 5%. The catering company was 35% of our entire business. It's not our story alone. We didn't feel safe when we were allowed to open the inside because we're in a very old, funky building, and didn't think we could keep the staff safe. So we are, just trying whatever. We're doing collaborations, with some other people. But we have, the PPP helped a lot. It helped with our rent. Our rent is very expensive in the area that we are. Trying to renegotiate our rent. All the costs seem to be going up. Food costs. We haven't raised our prices because we know our community is suffering as well. And I think that they feel extra pressure to come to our restaurants to help try and save them, to keep us in business. And so, one of the things I think that is going to go for us is going to be our ability to help our community. We always, with the wildfires, we just jumped in and helped feed our first responders, whoever. When the pandemic came, what we do is we feed, we nourish, we want to help. And we did about 20,000 meals in a short period of time so that we could keep people working. I fear that our community is going to lose some of the efforts that we give. And I know we can't make it on this capacity. It's just big expenses to a small occupancy. And so I don't know, honestly, I don't know.
And unlike Orlando, the town of Sonoma doesn't have the benefit of local property taxes to fall back on. So if local and state government doesn't get help from the federal government, and the city has to lay people off or cut services. Is it your take that that will hurt you even more?
Oh, without a question, on so many levels, whether it's the staff being able to pay their bills, whether it's us being able to pay our bills or even stay open, and definitely the community that depends on wages not being able to put more money into our community.
Thank you very much. Ms. Ah, in your testimony, you spoke to the desire to preserve the employer-employee relationship between you and your staff, and how the Paycheck Protection Program has provided you a temporary lifeline that has nearly exhausted itself. As we continue to weather this pandemic, how would having the certainty of getting an employee retention tax credit worth 80% of wages do to help you keep staff on until you can resume normal operations?
I mean, I think any sort of legislation that can help me as an employer to continue having my staff on board, you know, my main concern and my biggest priority is to keep the business open. So the finances have to make sense. So anything like tax credits or any additional financial relief would be most helpful. My second highest priority is, of course, to be able to pay my staff a fair wage. So we, you know, because of the generosity of the PPP, we've been able to give them temporary pay bumps and supplement some of the tips that they were no longer getting because we've had to close down. So, you know, I feel like it's been tough to make ends meet as, you know, a business operator. This is my first restaurant, so I'm learning everything. You know, just having to start a place from the ground up, and then now dealing with COVID, I feel like I've experienced all sorts of things in the restaurant industry. So I am trying to figure it out. But anything, you know, I do follow like what legislation gets passed, and I think things like the tax credits and things would, you know, greatly help us, just so that we can keep a minimal cash flow and cash runway to just operate the business. Because the restaurant industry, we already operate on very thin margins. Now we're operating at deep and steep losses on a weekly basis.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Sandoval, thank you for sharing your story, and very compelling and heartbreaking. Can you just tell us a little bit about what it would mean to your day-to-day life if we were able to enact some of our House Democratic priorities into law, like the $1,200 economic impact payments or the employee retention tax credit?
Well, I know the stimulus would help me a lot, just to continue living on a day-to-day basis, because like I make just over $1,000 a month on unemployment, and that's barely enough to get by, you know, and I'm barely doing that. I wish I could answer that really well for you, but it's really a difficult situation for me here, because food and beverage has been my life here. It's a hospitality town, and I would go out and get another job, but it's all hospitality here, and it's difficult. You know, I don't know what else to say to that. I just don't. You know.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Professor Giacomo, you had talked about the compensation for our restaurant workers, and can you just talk a little bit about how that may be exacerbating the problem that they're having? Does the nature of how we pay restaurant workers adversely affect them more than, say, the cashier in the store next door?
Thank you so much for asking that. As I mentioned, we were the nation's lowest paid workforce prior to the pandemic, and you know, a good 10 million workers were living with poverty wages prior to the pandemic, facing the highest rates of economic instability of any industry in the United States. Every year, the U.S. Department of Labor would release a list of the 10 lowest paying jobs, and every year, including this year, we'd be 6 or 7 of the lowest paying jobs in America. That's the restaurant industry. It's not reflective of the incredible employers who are on this call It's not reflective of the 850 amazing employers that are members of my association who believe in what we call taking the high road to profitability, believe in that paying your workers actually results in better employee retention, less turnover, increased productivity. We have documented so many amazing benefits to paying your workers livable wages and allowing them to move up ladders and allowing them to have access to benefits. But they didn't. For the vast majority of workers, they didn't. Prior to the crisis, they had in this country a $2 wage. 40 states in the United States, nearly 40 states have wages for these workers of less than $5 an hour from their employer. And that $2, $3, $4 wage in most states resulted in massive amounts of economic insecurity. You mentioned at the start of this hearing that it's a disproportionately young industry, and that is true. About 40% of restaurant workers are under the age of 24, but 60% of restaurant workers are above the age of 24. The median age is 36. These are largely working adults with children. You mentioned the number of single mothers in our industry. They are feeding kids on $2 and $3 and $4 wages, and that was prior to the pandemic. With the pandemic, that sub-minimum wage resulted in not just unemployment like the cashier next door, as you mentioned, but the inability to access unemployment insurance because in most states they were told your sub-minimum wage of $2 and $3 plus tips is too low to meet the minimum threshold to qualify. In many cases, tips went unreported, not just by the workers, but in many cases by employers. We had a woman from Michigan, a single mother, tell us, I have reported my tips religiously to the IRS every year, but because my employer didn't report my tips, my wage of $3.52 in Michigan was too low, and the state told me I couldn't qualify. Then I applied for the federal $600, and I was told I was eligible. So thank you to Congress for making sure that workers like Sarah May in Michigan could access federal when they couldn't access state. But then because of state systems, the inept and very antiquated state system, she had a very hard time accessing those $600. When she finally did, it ended. And so we need that to be renewed. But, the real issue I really want to emphasize is that these workers are now being asked to go back to work and being asked to tell customers, wear your masks, sit 6 feet apart. And those are the same customers from whom they're supposed to get tips to feed their families. And that is a direct contradiction, an impossible situation. And that's why we're encouraging, let's incentivize employers who are doing the right thing and moving away from that system. Let's provide tax credits. Let's look at changing that service charge to be treated like tips in the tax code so that more and more employers can move to a full minimum wage.
Thank you very much. Now I recognize Mr. Rice for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I come from Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, which you have witnesses here from Las Vegas, Orlando, New Orleans, all big tourist areas like Myrtle Beach. I have 1,700 restaurants on the Grand Strand, maybe the highest per capita number of restaurants per resident of anywhere in the country. So this issue touches me very, very deeply, and I find this hearing extremely frustrating, if not infuriating. We often, most of the time, I learn when I go to these hearings, I learn facts that I didn't know, but not today. I mean, we're hearing from all these witnesses about the struggles of restaurant business, and we all knew that very well. Back when this pandemic first hit and before the CARES Act was even in place, I wrote letters to leadership saying, if you're going to allocate $90 billion to airlines, you need to allocate hundreds of billions of dollars to the hospitality industry because they will be the most affected industry in this pandemic. And that is exactly proved to be true. Mr. Bernstein, you said we need help yesterday. Well, you know what? We've been offering help. I hate to make this a partisan issue, but it's the truth. On Wednesday, Republicans offered an extension of the PPP program that would have helped all you guys, and every Democrat voted against it. It was in a motion that we made on Wednesday to attach to a bill. Every Democrat voted against it. Every Republican voted for it. The truth is, guys, this is what the bottom line is. And with respect to Mr. Sandoval, you said make us safe if we come back. Mrs. Yai Roman, you were talking about make workers safe. I've offered tax credits of 50% of the cost to make your workplace safe and buy PPE and all those things. They were included in the Senate package that the Democrats wouldn't let be brought to the floor. I'm dropping a bill today that's modeled after the UK model that they've put in place for their restaurants, that where the government pays a 50% credit for people who go and eat out on Monday, Wednesday, and Tuesday, or Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, up to $13 per meal for a couple of months just to get restaurants up on their feet. I'm doing everything I can think of to try to help the restaurant industry. But the truth is, guys, today, that your help is being held up, and it's being held up by leadership. Why is it being held up? Because they want two things in this relief package, and they're not going to let us help you unless they get those things. And one of them is a bailout for state and local governments, mostly blue state and local governments. They got to have that, cost almost $1 trillion. And the second is they see you guys as a leverage point so that they can reinstate the deductibility of state and local taxes. Things that will help. 90% of that money goes to people in the top 10% of the income bracket. 50%, over 50% goes to people in the top 1%. Those two issues are what's holding this negotiation up. We could have already resolved this, passed the Senate package, and delivered the help to you yesterday, as you said, Mr. Bernstein. But the line in the sand for them is it's going to cost almost $2 trillion to reinstate the state and local tax deduction. Will help millionaires and billionaires, and it'll and bail out these state and local governments. You guys are being used as a pressure point. That's the purpose of this hearing today. You guys are being used as a pressure point to try and force a resolution of those two issues. And I think it's a shame. I think it's a disaster. I think we need to have delivered your help long ago. There's nobody, Republican or Democrat, on this panel who doesn't recognize and understand that you need this help. And we all want to deliver it to you. The question is, what ransom are we going to have to pay to get that to you? And it's the state and local tax bailout and this ability to write off state and local taxes. So, folks, I'm with you. I'm putting up every bill I know to try to help you. We've offered bill after bill as Republicans on the floor that have been uniformly rejected. What House leadership is saying, what the leadership on the other side is saying is, we won't let you deliver that help unless you give us those bailouts. So I am incredibly frustrated by this. It hurts my district, perhaps more than any other district. This help, you're right, Mr. Bernstein, should have been delivered yesterday. Mr. Sandoval, you're right. We got to make these workplaces safe so people can go back to work. But guys, let's stop the ruse and let's move ahead with this help and stop trying to ransom these people to help millionaires and billionaires.
Gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Doggett, you're recognized for 5 minutes. Mr. Doggett? We'll skip.
I think I got unmuted there finally, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your holding this hearing. We know that help was on the way for this industry and many others 4 months ago, May 15th, when the House passed legislation to address this pandemic. And tragically, the Senate, following the example of President Trump, in declaring the virus would just go away like a miracle here in the middle of the summer months, did nothing. They did nothing for 2 months. They sat on their hands. They failed to respond. They offered no alternatives. They refused to negotiate in any way. And more or less that same spirit has prevailed in the 2 months that have transpired since a first Senate bill finally came out. I, as Mr. Rice knows, happen to share his view about the provision on state and local taxes for a full repeal, but I think that has very little to do with where we are today. On the contrary, our position today has been to try to provide some relief and to negotiate in good faith. Much of the state and local assistance of which he complains is very important. And I found that in the communities that I represent, and I think this is true across the country, that providing assistance to local governments often allows them to reach out and fill in gaps that our federal legislation has not addressed, and to come up with creative ways to support restaurants in my community, the music industry, which is so important since we modestly claim to be the live music capital of the world in Austin, to find creative ways to assist those local workers and local businesses to survive. Obviously, in the communities I represent, restaurants just play a truly vital role in providing a community spirit, in providing employment, and most importantly, in providing good food. I have seen estimates in the state of Texas that we're going to lose half of our restaurants if we don't get some relief within the next 6 months. And I have seen that already begun to happen in my community. In Austin, Threadgill's, a place famous for performances by Janis Joplin and other musicians in the past, shut down permanently. Magnolia losing one of its major locations. In San Antonio, Angel's Mexican Haven, great Tex-Mex food on the east side, anticipates they will never reopen, and the same is true of a number of other establishments. I think it is vital that we get assistance. I have seen the efforts of local restaurants like Joe's Bakery, like the Asian Market that is headed by Eric Yee, to try to survive with takeout. They have struggled because they don't always have the connections that permitted easy access to PPP, which may have been a good concept, but initially in the first round seemed to have done a lot more to help the folks that were well connected rather than those that were the most in need. He finally got assistance in the second round, but with business down 50%, with the cost of takeout higher than in-store service, it's a real challenge. And it is, of course, the restaurant workers that we have to be equally concerned about. I've been troubled in the past that so often when there was a measure before the Congress, whether it was sick leave for workers or health care for workers or child care for workers or raising the minimum wage, that the National Restaurant Association was one of the first groups to oppose the provision. I'm pleased that last year the House adopted the Raise the Wage Act, which would raise the some minimum wage for tip workers over time to the level of the general minimum wage. And I think the watchword as we go forward is that we've got to do this together. We need to protect our restaurants from closing, but we also need to address the specific needs of the workers within those restaurants and see that they are treated fairly, that assistance is conditional. I particularly appreciate the efforts that our colleague, Senator Earl Blumenauer, has made with his Restaurants Act. And it is so disappointing that despite all the talk about supporting the restaurant industry from the various Republican colleagues, that there is nothing in the new skinny McConnell bill that specifically addresses the needs of the restaurant industry. I hope we can move forward, Mr. Chairman, together, and I thank you.
Mr. Swiker, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And as we all boast about our communities, when you have Scottsdale as part of your district, I think one of the true food capitals of the country, particularly in the winter months, I'm looking forward to a restaurant competition. I actually have a couple questions, and also would like to get some input, because that's what a hearing truly should be about, and less of a speechifying. Would an extension of the PPP, maybe another round of that, would that provide a backstop? I have a piece of legislation with some of my colleagues, even here on the committee, that would provide a tax credit for testing, as well as PPP or personal protective equipment and do the tax credit right off the payroll, so it would be a very quick turnaround of having the capital pay for those things. But one question I really want to get my head around, Mr. Rodrigue, I'm going to actually start with you. After the pandemic, let's say Congress steps up, we do our job, we do things to help restaurants and other small businesses make it through this. What's the future look like? Has the migration to meals going out the door, is that the future? Is this going to change the employment curve on restaurants? For many of us, I started as a dishwasher as one of my first jobs. That's one of the ways I paid my way through school. So can you share with us what's the future, and are we doing the right thing in how we will address providing, if we get together, a backstop? So, Melvin?
Yes, sir. Thank you. That is a great question. I see the future as very bright for restaurants, including full service. The reality is that restaurants are an integral part of our society. They're the cornerstone of communities. And not just because they're literally on every corner, but because people join together to share experiences and to be a part of one another's lives. You can't get that just through takeout. You can get sustenance through takeout and delivery, but we are already seeing it, albeit in limited demand right now, because we have limited capacities that are challenging us. And we also have limited demand because, you know, there are those who are calling us and literally telling us they want to come back, but, you know, they continue to hear the fear that's out there. So I think that the future for restaurants is bright.
Well, part of my question is also, will the way food is delivered change? And maybe it's just unknowable at this point. Ms. Ha, thank you for being here. I actually remember season 3. Coming from a family of foodies, that's actually one of our hobbies of watching that. For your business right now, for your Blind Goat restaurant, how much is going out the door in shall we say pickup and delivery, and how is that helping in sustaining you? I'm trying to get my head around what's the business look like, what does the bleed or the profitability look like when you're pickup and delivery?
Sure. Thank you for that question, sir. Before the pandemic, our revenue, we were starting to see climb over 80,000 a month, and that's great for a small stall like mine. Right after we started closing down, like I said, we had to pivot immediately to pick up and delivery. In the month of May, our revenue was $7,600. So that is 90% drop. The delivery has somewhat helped sustain us, but I don't think it can be for the long term necessarily, unless we are able to eventually open back up once the pandemic is more under control. Particularly, it's because a lot of the delivery apps do take 30%. At the end of the day, like that's really very much digging into profit margins. So, we're doing it now because it's helping to just keep the business alive. But I think in the long term, it's not necessarily completely sustainable. But, we are slowly in Texas seeing foot traffic more back in the restaurants, as, recently Governor Abbott just allowed us to increase indoor capacity to 75%, although there's not necessarily that much traffic because people are still, quite frankly, staying at home and self-quarantining. But, there is a little bit more traffic, and that is, I think, what we need in the long run is that social aspect. And it's just kind of a challenge to be in this strange atmosphere where we're trying to socially distance, but
it is difficult and thank you for sharing. Mr. Chairman, I appreciate I believe many of us are comfortable with the Restaurant Act's design that's in the Senate. I'm hoping maybe we even as a committee could step up and find a way to get this to move forward. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Larson, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for holding this hearing. And I would like to associate myself with the remarks of Mr. Doggett and our colleague Earl Blumenauer, who certainly has led on this issue. I want our colleagues on the other side to know that we share your frustration You know, imagine being in a body, the House of Representatives, and having sent over 500 bills, 500, that the Senate has never acted on, more than 70% of them bipartisanly adopted. You talk about frustration. That is thoroughly frustrating. And let us hope that we can change that in the future. But I also, Mr. Schweikert left, but I do think that these hearings should be about asking questions as well. And Mayor Dyer, is state and local property tax relief helpful to you, or is this something that you think is extraneous and shouldn't be included as part of this COVID pandemic that has impacted everybody across the board, not just in this country, but around the globe?
This is going to have a lasting effect on the revenues for local governments. The decrease in revenues and then added expenditures related to testing and all things COVID. We're not in as bad a position as a lot of other local governments and state governments that are heavily reliant on sales tax. We expect that we'll see more danger in coming years. If commercial property values decrease, we think our downtown, as I mentioned before, is at about 20% occupancy right now. So we know rental rates are going to go down. So any type of relief that the Congress can give local governments and state governments would be helpful.
Thank you, Mr. Dyer. Mr. Gyerman, if we discussed previously in the Ways and Means Committee, this crisis is having a disproportionate effect on people of color and women specifically. How is protecting the paychecks of restaurant workers an effective way to deliver relief to these populations?
Well, the industry is disproportionately women and people of color. Of the 13.6 million workers in America, majority are women, and that's even higher among tipped workers. 70% of them are women. They are disproportionately of color. Close to 45% of workers are of color. But I think it's important to note that as much as we celebrate the diversity of this industry, hopefully in this moment when there's a national call for racial equity, we can understand that diversity is different from equity, and that workers of color are in the industry, but it doesn't mean that they have the highest paid positions in the industry. They are segregated into lower paying restaurants, casual and fast food restaurants. They are segregated into lower paying positions. They work as bussers and runners and dishwashers and cooks rather than as servers and bartenders in fine dining restaurants. And the differential is enormous. It is at least a $5 per hour wage gap between Black women and white men in this industry as a result of segregation, as a result of historical legacies of slavery, and as a result of customer biases in tipping. And as a result, any efforts, any support for restaurant workers, PPP, has a disproportionately higher impact on workers of color because they have less savings, they have less ability to turn to family and friends for support. They are more likely to be home insecure, food insecure, and they are also much more likely to have family members impacted by the pandemic. And Chairman Thompson, I wanted to know if it would be okay to enter into the record the testimony of Kimani Hill, who's a restaurant worker who wanted to share his story today, and also restaurant owner Jason Hamill of Lula Cafe in Chicago, who's very supportive of workers. Those two testimonies.
Without objection, we can do that, yes.
Thank you. I just wanted to share, to answer your question, the story of Kimani Hill.
If I could, because we have limited time, I just wanted to make sure that we had an opportunity to ask Mr. Sandoval a question. But I do thank you, and we'll take whatever question you further answer and submit it to with writing with the chairman's position. I wanted to acknowledge a number of the restaurants clearly in my district as well, and they're too voluminous to mention by name, but certainly Augie and Ray's of East Hartford I want to single out. But Mr. Sandoval, I greatly appreciate you sharing your story with the committee today. And during your testimony, you mentioned how since your $600 expired and an unemployment insurance has helped you get through this year,
The gentleman's
as well as
time
your struggle.
Ms. Sanchez, you're recognized for 5 minutes. You may have to unmute. There you go.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses today for sharing the impact that the pandemic is having on this sector in communities across our country. I want to quickly share what restaurants in my community in Southern California have told me. So many of these small businesses want to do right by their employees and customers. And Sandra Hahn, who is the owner of Crepes and Grapes in my hometown of Whittier, shared with me that the lack of communication and coordination from the federal government is making things literally impossible. She is continually trying to piece together safety and financial guidance while fighting to keep her doors open, and there just aren't enough hours in the day for her to do all of those things. CDC guidance has been slow or just plain confusing. A patchwork of local recommendations tries to fill in the gaps. Masks have become a political issue, adding another burden on her employees who are trying to enforce basic safety protocols to keep themselves and the patrons safe. Then there are the costs, the obvious costs of PPE, sanitation equipment, and training so that employees know how to follow the safety procedures, plus mounting new costs to outfit dining spaces, keep bugs away, and beautify a parking lot or street to entice customers to come. And I didn't even get into the added impact from wildfires that have been mentioned today. These costs add up quickly, especially for small businesses who ate through their PPP loans, simply making sure that their staff could keep food on their own tables. Turning to our panelists today, Mayor Dyer, your comments about taking a walk through your community to hear stories of people who put everything they have into their business really hit home for me, because I do these small business walks throughout my district as well. And restaurants are really the heart of a vibrant community, and they often lead to the revitalization of a distressed area. I appreciate that you talked about the tax provisions needed to help these businesses stay afloat and keep employing our friends and neighbors. And Chairman Thompson touched briefly on this, but I'm hoping you could comment further on the next crisis you are likely facing, which is a budget shortfall for your city. My own cities have painted a grim picture of revenue shortfalls that are going to affect schools, public safety, and countless community programs. I'm curious to know, what does that look like for you?
So we're a 300,000 person city in a 1.4 million county. The county is more reliant on sales tax through our tourist development tax, which last year was about 300 million and is probably at 5% of that in collection. So that has been a very substantial impact, but that's more on the county government than it is the city government. We're more reliant on property taxes, and those rates were set prior to the pandemic. So we're probably going to be okay this year. It's next year that we're deeply concerned about, because we think that the values of commercial property is going to be impacted substantially because people are not coming to the office, restaurants are closing, all those types of establishments. So we think next year is a year that we're going to be in some serious revenue shortfalls.
If you were in a jurisdiction that relied on those sales tax revenues for funding of city services, and those have been decimated because of the stay-at-home orders, because this pandemic has been allowed to rage on, what would that do to impact restaurants in terms of lack of state and local government funding?
It would be I think the same for restaurants and any other small business. If you're a city that is reliant on sales tax, you're going to have to cut services, whether that's garbage, whether that's police and fire. You're going to have to cut services because in a dire economic time like this, there's no way that you can raise taxes on your citizens. So there's no other choice.
Thank you. Without funding for state and local governments, like what was included in the House Pact HEROES Act, local budgets across the country are going to be gutted at a time when people need those local supports more than ever. Mr. Sandoval, I want to thank you for sharing your story, what you have been through, and what you have fought for, not just for yourself, but your fellow workers, is inspiring. Could you talk a bit more about how your union's efforts to ensure a return to work ordinance is going?
Well, we're working on that still, but that return to work ordinance is going to be for union and not non-union workers. So if your business shut down over COVID, you have the right to return when the business resumes and gets back to normal. And you go back in seniority, not at the whim of that employer's will, whoever he wants to bring back. So it's going good. I think it's coming up on the calendar in October with the county commission. So I'm hoping that it goes through because as of now, it's been 6 months since I've been back at work and my recall rights are expired. So I am at the mercy of the company or the
Thank you.
passing
Thank you,
of
Mr.
the
Sandoval.
law.
The gentlelady's time has expired.
Thank you very much.
Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Sandoval, and all our witnesses.
Mr. LaHood, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for this hearing today. And let me just acknowledge and thank all the witnesses for your valuable testimony today on this important topic related to restaurants and what we need to be doing. You know, looking back to the spring when we passed the PPP program as part of the stimulus relief, it's probably the best thing that we did in terms of helping the economy. It was really a lifeline in my district to small businesses, whether those are restaurants and bars or manufacturers. And we did it in a bipartisan way, and it's been immensely successful. And I think the frustrating part, and everybody on this call has expressed it, on why we can't do that again, why we can't have some type of revised or reformed PPP type program. And I look at businesses that continue to struggle and will continue to struggle until we get a vaccine or a cure or a treatment. And I know many of my colleagues share the same thing, but I look at the hospitality industry, the travel industry, lodging industry, gyms and workout facilities, banquet facilities, music venues, and of course, restaurants, as everybody has articulated today. But these are all entities that will not come back fully until we get a cure or a vaccine or a treatment. So the head scratcher is why we can't come together to have a revised PPP type program that helps your industry and all these other industries, and do that in a type of loan program that extends out the next 6 to 9 months. And I look at my state of Illinois and see that many of these restaurants and other entities are not going to make it the next 6 to 9 months through the winter and through the rough time that is ahead. And so why we can't come together again with something we already did in the spring and set a formula on how this can work. But I know that's what the hearing today is about, but we ought to be able to put politics aside and do this for the betterment of the restaurant industry and the country on this. And as we've seen with a number of pieces of legislation that have been introduced, we ought to scale it down and look at what's most important. And the restaurant industry and small businesses and these disproportionately affected businesses or targeted businesses, however you want to look at it, that's what we ought to be focused on. And unfortunately, when you look at how many other things get added to these bills, but I for one, believe we ought to prioritize what I just mentioned. And if we put that on the floor, it would pass overwhelmingly. It would pass the Senate, in my view. So let's focus on that and try to do that here in the next week while we have time before the election to do it. And I would be supportive of that moving forward. I want to move to a couple questions here. Melvin, I wanted to just ask you, we've heard a lot about the safety and public health of workers in the restaurant industry. And obviously, different states have had different policies. The state of Illinois have been very frustrated with our governor, who's had kind of a one-size-fits-all approach to the state. The area that I represent in Illinois is a rural area, medium-sized cities, but the governor's had a one-size-fits-all for the entire state. And obviously, the concern for health and safety is first and foremost. Can you talk a little bit, Melvin, about the different states and the restrictive policies that have been put in place and how that's affected the restaurant industry, and any suggestions you would have on that?
Yes, thank you, Congressman. First and foremost, I appreciate your thoughts on PPP. Another round would be really a lifeline to many, many businesses. Specific to your question on the policies of different states, it's been extremely difficult to navigate Here in New Orleans, the mayor has taken a different tack than the governor. Both have valid approaches, but they're different. And so it has created a lot of confusion and difficulty for operators. And if you think about it in the context of, every business, the certainty that they have for operations is what they need. When there's uncertainty because you don't know what the policy is going to be or what the restriction is going to be, and we're not getting those in advance, then it's difficult to build towards it. I think everyone has embraced the PPE, and everyone is taking it extremely seriously as operators. Enhanced protocols, et cetera, those are positives, and we've gotten that. And I think there's good communication on it and a general theme on how to attack that. But capacities and larger gatherings when it comes to receptions for people's weddings and things of that nature, which are huge food and beverage industry.
Thank you. The gentleman's time has expired. Ms. Delbaney, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank all of our witnesses for joining us for this very important hearing. The pandemic has made this an incredibly difficult time for everyone in our communities and for restaurants in particular. And I know that many of the restaurants that I've heard from in my region are small family-owned businesses, some who've been forced to shutter everything they've worked so hard to achieve. And restaurant owners who've been in business over 30 years and fought their way through several financial crises are saying they don't know how they're going to make it through this recession. It's truly heartbreaking. And we, House Democrats, put additional resources for restaurants in the HEROES Act. And one important provision was the expansion of the employee retention tax credit or the jobs credit to give we also worked on another round of economic impact payments and expansion for child care and refundable tax credits that could help families and workers who are struggling. But that's still legislation, unfortunately, the Senate hasn't looked at. Ms. Bernstein, I want to thank you for taking time to be with us here today. I'm also from the West Coast, and I know that in addition to dealing with the pandemic, the West Coast was also hit hard with wildfires and poor air quality. And I know the air quality shut down outdoor dining recently. I wondered if you could talk a little bit about how the expanded employee retention tax credit, which would also be paired with a 50% credit for operational costs, could better position you and your workers as you prepare for the winter and colder weather conditions in your region. As we know, there may not be sufficient indoor space that can seat people safely distanced in accordance with state guidelines, and we have to be prepared for that change as it comes forward. So your thoughts on what we can do to help you there, and the employee retention tax credit expansion.
Yeah, thank you. I guess a question that I would have on the tax retention is that if I'm not able to employ anyone because I don't have any place to operate, how do I get that credit? I mean, I don't think I understand that part, but we just need help wherever. I don't know that we're going to be able to open this winter. And so I'm just going to be sitting on paying a small amount of salaried people probably that I am going to need, and paying rent and fixed costs that are there. But, to go business, takeout is not going to cover, I could use 10 people versus 80 people. So I'm not quite sure, honestly, how that would help, but I know anything would help. And
One
looking for
one key of the employee retention tax credit is that it is a tax credit which would help cover payroll, so that you were able to put your resources in other areas and keep people connected to their jobs and their benefits. I also wanted to ask you what are some of the challenges that you face with the Paycheck Protection Program, and any concerns you have about forgivability of the loan?
We are in the forgivability state right now, and had had it not changed, I mean, I wish some of the restrictions had changed a month or 6 weeks prior to when they did, because we had spent so much of that money trying to make sure that we had 100 full-time people, you know, our head count where it was. And so we spent money at a time where we weren't open because we had to, and we knew that we couldn't afford to be paying back huge amounts of money back if we weren't forgiven. So completely grateful that we got to where we did, but we're kind of back at the same exact place that we were prior to the original PPP. We're just looking at how we're going to get through the next months, how we can keep people on. I'm especially concerned without the extra $600 for team members. If we can't put them to work and they can't get extra benefits, I worry, you know, every day. I haven't taken a salary since March, and that's just to keep money into my business to do whatever I can to the staff that I have there. I don't know if that answers that.
No,
exactly.
thank you. Thank you so much for your feedback. I appreciate it. And I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentlelady. Ms. Moore, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for this subcommittee hearing, this very important issue. And I just want to join everyone in really mourning the loss of so many of our very important small businesses throughout the United States, and recognizing the burden that this has brought on them. I've really been moved by the testimony from all of our witnesses about the very small margins that restaurants work on, even under the best of circumstances, and the amount of time and energy and, quite frankly, love that these people have put into this venture. So given that, I just want to address, follow a line of questioning. I think it was opened up by Mr. Smith in his opening remarks when he talked about the sort of veering off the topic. But if we're indeed talking about the sustainability of restaurants and the industry, I think that we can't just be concerned about the extension of tax credits, PPP, the employment retention tax credit. We do have to be concerned about the health of our workers as well. I was very moved by Mr. Sandoval's total testimony, where he talked about the cost of paying for COBRA and healthcare. And so I just want to give maybe Mr. Rodrigue an opportunity to say, because I looked at your blueprint, because I think it's very, very good and very important, but I think, wouldn't you agree that it's really important to sync that a particular vision for saving restaurants with providing more unemployment insurance for the people who can't come back? You know, if people have 50% capacity, then there are 50% of workers who are still at home. And the importance, so it's not off topic. I guess I just want sort of an affirmation and agreement from you, sir, that of course, that's a part of saving the industry.
Thank you, Congressman. I would say that is certainly true. The unemployment benefits is an important factor. And I think that we would implore you to find a balanced solution. The challenge in front of us is that the demand is not totally there. So we certainly want help for our employees.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you, sir. That was fully responsive. And I guess I just want to say before my time expires, that is, you know, I have a bill that I welcome all of my members to look at. It's not outside of the jurisdiction of the entire committee. And that's a bill to support families during crises like this. I mean, we've seen Katrina, we have seen this pandemic. There's no indication of wildfires. There is no suggestion that that we're going to not have these emergencies that disrupt employability. And so restaurant industry is the most vulnerable, as you've all indicated. And so I guess I want to ask the young woman Ms. Saru, about the minimum wage. I guess my question for you in my last few seconds is, to the extent that we don't want to necessarily transfer all of the liability for having an economically sustainable business in the restaurant industry, would you agree that things like raising the minimum wage, providing a more robust earned income tax credit might be ways to help this industry outside of out, and if we raise the minimum wage, we can definitely raise people's living standards. And I guess I just want to give you my last few seconds to comment on that.
Thank you, Congresswoman Moore. It's not just me who agrees with that. It's not just hundreds of thousands of workers who are calling for that. There are literally at this point hundreds, if not thousands, of employers who have actually come together with us to say, this is the time. This is the time when we are rethinking every aspect of our business to restructure compensation in our industry. Even the National Restaurant Association's own trade magazine, Nation's Restaurant News, headline last Friday was, "Pandemic is forcing the industry to rethink tip credit and wages." Everybody is rethinking the fact that we have a $2 wage that clearly didn't work during the pandemic.
We got to build back better. We can't go back to the day before the pandemic. And with that, I would yield back, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
The gentlelady's time has expired. Mr. Aiken, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the hearing, and Mr. Smith, ranking member, and our witnesses. Just real quick on that last point, it just seems like there's an endless list of well-intended policies from my Democratic colleagues that will have the unintended impact of losing jobs, millions across the country. And those folks that have to meet a payroll, like Melvin, Rodrigue, they get it. When the government mandates closure, when they mandate that you have to pay, when they mandate that you have to buy this healthcare product, you just putting big brother's boot on their neck and then asking, why don't you guys help create jobs and give people, create this land of opportunity that people literally risk their lives to come to? It doesn't make any sense to me. But I am grateful that we're having this hearing, Mr. Chairman, because nobody's been pummeled in this pandemic more than our small businesses and mainly restaurants. And listen, Mr. Rodrigue, I'm married into a New Orleans family, and I'm a lucky Texan. And my in-laws, the Myers, have taken me to Galatoire. It's unbelievable. And and by the way, the Galatoire goûter, the Rockefeller oyster, and all these things that I'm learning as a West Texan, we don't eat much fish and seafood this far west. But you guys represent what restaurants mean to our citizens and to our families: a respite and a retreat from the hustle and bustle and the stresses of everyday life. And it's a place to connect and have community, and where we've made our best memories. And so restaurants are more than just food and good dining and service. It's a big part of our psyche as Americans and our greatest memories. And we need y'all to come back. And one thing we got to do, Mr. Rodrigue, in my opinion, is as this president has done the right thing to delegate and defer these healthcare protocols to the state and local governments, we've got to stop with these mandates that are keeping folks from making a living and putting not just food on the table in restaurants, but food on your family's tables. And the other issue of unemployment insurance, we want to help everybody, and we want to provide assistance where it's needed. And whether that's cash assistance or employee retention credits or work opportunity credits. But what we don't want to do is have well-intended policies that actually work as a perverse incentive for you guys being able to come back. And I think when we're paying people, and in my district, Melvin, we had 75% of the folks on unemployment were being paid more to be on unemployment than to be at the job that they had prior to COVID. So my restaurateurs and my small business are saying, please find a better way to help individuals and their families than this perverse incentive structured in $600 a week on unemployment insurance. Melvin, tell me about that from your perspective. Again, how do we help folks without hurting your chances and those you represent in the restaurant industry of coming back? That 40% or some 200,000 restaurants that could close on account of government making it difficult to impossible for you to come back. Can you comment on that for me, please?
Yeah, thank you, Congressman. Quickly, that was my point a moment ago. We definitely need to help employees, but we need to find a balanced way because when we're trying to get employees to come back to work, we're in a difficult spot when they're incentivized not to be there. So finding the right balance, I implore y'all to do that. In reference to the restaurant closures, we've had over 100,000 close, and we've got 40% of operators on a very large survey that tell us if we don't do something now before this election, 40% say that they cannot survive the next 6 months without some additional form of federal aid. You all acted so quickly when it came to PPP, very appreciative of that. We need action again because without that lifeline, restaurants aren't going to be able to reopen. We love the long-term solution of an industry-specific restaurant recovery fund. The National Restaurant Association was the first to promote that way back in March. So we're in favor of that.
The gentleman's time has expired. Thank you. Mr. Boyle, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I assume you can hear me okay?
Yes,
all right.
We can.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you. And thank you for holding this hearing on such an important issue. I want to use my 5 minutes just to focus on my district and my constituents here in the city of Philadelphia. In the last few decades, as many of you know, Philadelphia has become known for its robust and vibrant food scene. The food scene, in fact, not only attracts tourists, but even new residents to the city. So in the case of Philadelphia, it's not just about helping business owners and employees, it's about helping the entire community. There were 6,500 food-related businesses that operate in Philadelphia pre-pandemic, representing 18% of the city's businesses. More than 86% of the businesses are small operations employing fewer than 20 people. In 2016, the food economy locally contributed $66 million in wage tax revenue to the city. That's 4% of the city's entire revenue. So in addition to the city's lost revenue, what has also been lost is the amount of money that has to be spent on the public health response. So it's really a drop in revenue combined with, of course, the increase in expenses. Let me share a few of the stories from restaurant owners, what's happening in the city, because they're really the most eloquent voices on this topic and know more about it more than anyone. Tyler Aiken, he has several restaurants in the city. Due to the pandemic, he was forced to permanently close one restaurant just yesterday and says that without any assistance from the government, he will have to close all of his restaurants in Philadelphia. Karan Horn, someone I know personally, here were his words, quote, prior to COVID, I was slated to open a new brunch/coffee concept in February in Philadelphia called the Guardhouse. COVID caused us to stop our build out due to construction labor regulations regulated the shutdown. We are now pushed to late October with construction gearing back up. Once we open up, we hope to navigate our approach in terms of indoor dining. We may have to get creative with delivery only and adjust our hours to optimize revenue. We also have had to lose new hires who have yet to start working, but we're counting on us to open. The restaurant owners from HIP City Veg, they say that they strongly support the Restaurants Act, additional rounds of PPP, and expanding and improving the EIDL. They say these issues are, quote, life and death for most restaurants, especially as they head into the colder winter months and the loss of outdoor seating. So Chairman Thompson, I ask unanimous consent to have entered into the record a statement from restaurant owner Karan Horn, a statement from restaurant owners of Hip City Veg, a letter from Save Philly Restaurants, a letter from Tom Keogh, owner of Yards Brewery, testimony from a distillery owner, a great entrepreneur, Rob Cassell, and statements from Union Transfer, World Cafe Live, and Warehouse on Watts on music venues in Philadelphia.
Without objection, such will be the order.
So let me, in the time I have remaining, I'd like to touch on, and you could tell by the latter statements that I asked to be entered, I'd like to touch on the breweries, distilleries, and music venues in Philadelphia. We have a ton of them, and they are struggling to remain open and solvent during this pandemic, which obviously is through no fault of their own. They offer great value to life here in Philadelphia, but even beyond the sort of what they bring to our culture, just in terms of dollars and cents, this is a significant part of our economy. So let me ask to Ms. Jairaman, do you think the pandemic will lead to better compensation and support for the service industry employees, given that we now recognize in a new way just how valuable they are, maybe realizing that now more so than we did pre-pandemic? And what specifically do you think Congress can do to help them?
Thank you so much, Ms. Boyle. Yes, the pandemic revealed the untenability of the compensation structure of the industry. Pennsylvania is $2.83. It's that's the sub-minimum wage for tipped workers in Pennsylvania. It's one of 43 states with this wage that is completely untenable and was revealed to be so during the pandemic. And yes, we are seeing literally hundreds of restaurants change practices on their own voluntarily because frankly, they can't get their workers to come back. Workers are saying, I don't want to go back, expose my family and myself to the virus for a $2 wage or a $3 wage when tips are so low.
The gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Byer, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. And I especially want to thank Professor Jairaman for her testimony. It's the most compelling argument I've heard, yes, about the immorality of the sub-minimum wage. And thanks, Chairman Thompson, so much for holding this important hearing. You know, I know many restaurateurs and restaurant workers who are watching this hearing, like my friend Mango Mike of Shooter McGee's in Alexandria, hoping to hear that the federal government will give them the aid they desperately need to save their businesses as we continue to keep our community safe. My wife and I got up 6:30 this morning to walk the streets of Old Town Alexandria, restaurant after restaurant after restaurant, either closed or with the tables out in the middle of the street. We can't let them down. And that's why I support my dear friend Earl Blumenauer's Restaurants Act, as well as the critical provisions in the HEROES, like the expanded ERTC and the paid leave provisions that would allow restaurant workers to stay home if they're sick and give this industry, its employees, and our communities that rely on them a necessary lifetime. Some restaurants, though sadly not all, have been able to make it to this point, combining takeout business and outdoor service. We seem to do the takeout service every night. And we try not to use the delivery services only because of that 30%. But as temperatures drop, and combined with the possibility of increasing caseloads, we've seen its stubborn 5% positivity text rate, the federal support becomes necessary day by day by day. Restaurants aren't the only industry. There's so many others that are relying on an ERTC through PPP, the Restart Act. But let me read some testimonials from constituents that have sent it to me. A restaurant worker in Alexandria wrote, restaurant workers were struggling before this crisis hit. Now it's even worse. Most of us are still unemployed and underemployed with little relief in sight. On top of that, most of us still do not have access to paid sick days. We're calling on you to show leadership in this unprecedented time and provide more financial relief to all restaurant workers. Federal lawmakers need to pass the HEROES Act and include a second stimulus check within the bill. And this from Falls Church, quote, I'm an independent restaurant operator and I'm reaching out to tell you that our industry needs meaningful relief to survive the coronavirus pandemic. The restaurant industry has faced unparalleled challenges that have hit independent restaurants who operate as small businesses the hardest. We are your hometown restaurants where you gather with family, friends, and colleagues and are the cornerstones of communities. And while the CARES Act will provide temporary relief for many industries, it doesn't address the real needs of restaurants. Our industry is heavily dependent on cash flow with little or no reserves, and our profit margins are razor thin. We need relief that fits the unique needs of our industry that is the second largest private sector employer both locally and nationally. There's great uncertainty about the impact of coronavirus on our culture, especially on independent restaurants that are the epicenter of community gatherings and social activity. So Ms. Ha and Ms. Bernstein, you both qualified for and received PPP loans, but those clearly were not enough to sustain your businesses and employees for this long duration of this pandemic. What changes from the CARES Act and PPP do you view as necessary for the continued viability of your restaurants? Or in other words, what do you need right now that will allow you to get through?
Is that for me or for Christine?
Why don't you start, Ms. Bernstein?
Okay. Yeah, I just, looking ahead, I think, there's a lot of valuable substance in the PPP that would help us get people paid and, keep our operating expenses moving. And it's just really, things are changing so quickly. So it's hard to know, are we going to be inside? Are we going to be outside? Can we have, we're not outside, will we have 25% or 50%? So the numbers are moving all the time. And yeah, I'll give it to Christine.
I think initially my restaurant, we didn't get the first round of funding. We had to reapply. We did get it in the second one. I think just being able to expand the program, meaning I think less restrictions on it. We also need help with operating costs. We are a restaurant industry, so we're holding inventory that is food that can quickly go bad. We need help with paying for PPE, putting up plexiglass to protect our staff and the guests. I think if there was an expansion on the restrictions on such federal aid to help us do other things that require, to operate the business, that would be helpful.
Thank you. The gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Kelly, you're recognized for 5 minutes. Mr. Kelly, are you with us? We'll come back to Mr. Kelly. Mr. Swazi, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Hey, I'm sorry to jump over you, Mike. You can hear me, right, Chairman?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for pulling this together. I really appreciate it. I'd like to submit for the record a letter from the U.S. Travel Association. I'll get it submitted to your team, where they talk about how their unemployment rate is 34.5% versus the national average of 8.4%, and how they're affected by the downturn in the travel industry.
Without objections, that should be the order.
Thank you very much. I want to thank all the witnesses. Mayor Dyer, I'm a former mayor myself. I could just imagine how frustrating it is for you when you have all your local residents coming to you and you just don't have the power to fix this problem. This is a national problem that requires the federal government's help. And my heart goes out to you because I know you care about your people. And Sandra Bernstein, thank you so much. It was really so inspiring to listen to you when you talked about what a joy you get from serving people like that. And Christine Ha, the same thing. I want you to know, Ms. Ha, that when you were speaking, I was listening to you and I was looking at the faces of my colleagues and people were smiling, listening to your story. Everything that you shared with us. And Mario Sandoval and Saru Jayarman, thank you for making it clear that this is not just about the businesses, which are so important, but it's about the workers. And there are so many people unemployed right now. And the unemployment rate amongst restaurant workers is higher than any other industry in the country, just about. And especially with catering halls. I've got 8,000 restaurants and catering halls here on Long Island, 100,000 people involved in the employment. And the reaction to the coronavirus has been so uneven. Right now, grocery stores are doing great. Online businesses are doing great. Some restaurants have a lot of outdoor capacity and they're doing pretty well. And they have takeout businesses that are doing well, but other places don't have outdoor facilities and they're just shut down. and people are afraid to go indoors, and some places have restrictions on going indoors. So it's just so uneven, and it's so unfair, and it's so frustrating here in Washington when we know we have to do something and we're not getting it done.
This is my mic.
And I want to associate myself with all of my colleagues' remarks, everything everybody's had to say, except for Mr. Rice. I'm not going to associate myself with Mr. Rice's remarks because it's just so divisive and so inappropriate. I think that we need to really figure out how we can get going together. And I want to thank Mr. Rodrigue for him being here today as well. And I want to ask him some questions, if I may, Mr. Rodrigue. Are you there, Mr. Rodrigue?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay. How many restaurants would you say there are in the United States of America? Because I see some places where it says 685,000 restaurants and other places 1 million. Do you have any sense of how many restaurants there are in America?
So food service establishments are in the million range.
And would you say how many people were employed in the restaurant/catering business before the
15.1 million.
And what would you say the unemployment rate is now among the restaurant business?
Right now, we have about 7 million unemployed.
So just think about that. 7 million of 15 million, it's almost 50% of people are unemployed. And the unemployment rate nationwide is 8.5%. So
Yes,
this
sir.
is just a devastating impact on this industry. That's why I'm so happy. I'm co-sponsoring, original co-sponsor with Earl Blumenauer on the Restaurants Act. And, it provides $120 billion in grants, outright grants to restaurants that compare their 2020 revenues to their 2019 revenues. And it would be like such a godsend to the people that are suffering so much. And for those restaurants that are doing fine, their revenues won't be as off from 2019 as they were in 2020. But for those places that are shut down or can't open, they're only indoor, they have no outdoor facilities, they'll get a lot of help. So it really makes a lot of sense to me. And we got the winter coming. And down where you are, Mr. Rodrigue, it's very different. I want you to know that Senator Cassidy, a Republican, though, is one of the lead sponsors for state and local aid in the federal government right now. He really wants to get state and local aid. So some people say this is not, we're holding ransom, something absurd like that. Your senator, who's a Republican, is one of the strongest sponsors of state and local aid. And I want to point out that I'm the vice chairman of a group called the Problem Solvers Caucus. We've got 25 Democrats and 25 Republicans to try and find some common ground on some of these issues here. And we got 25 Republicans to agree that we need to have $500 billion in state and local aid. And we got 25 Democrats to agree that we need to do some liability reform. Anyway, Mr. Rodrigue, what do you think the most important thing we need to do for the restaurants is? Is it the PPP? Is it the Restaurants Act?
The gentleman's time has expired.
Oh, sorry about that.
We're going to go back to Mr. Kelly. Mr. Kelly, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. We were having trouble getting unmuted. First of all, Ms. Ha, Tommy just said about listening to your testimony, and you can see all the faces here smiling at the time. You were that's one of the most inspirational panel members I've ever listened to, and how from the time your family left Vietnam, you came here, you faced an uphill battle every step of the way, but you've never stopped. You just keep going. I find you so inspirational. It is incredible. I'm sitting here with some of the staff, and we're looking at each other and says, please, I don't want to hear anybody say how hard their life has been. No, I'm serious. You are so inspirational. From the very time you left Vietnam, you came here. It's amazing. I think that while we all appreciate everybody's presence here today, and Mike, thanks for having this. I know that every one of us has the same problem. Doesn't matter what state you're in, doesn't matter what town you live in. All of you are in the same boat. And I'm also, my family's been in the retail business. We're third generation now. But I think we look at what's happening, and all the states have the ability to do what they think is best, what's be responsible and smart. One of the problems I got to tell you, in Pennsylvania, we are second only to California in the restrictive guidance, and yet we're number 41. If you look at all 50 states, we're number 41 in number of cases. So it's not like we have a lot of cases. So the thing comes, well, then why can't we open up? And in Pennsylvania, Governor Wolf has determined that you can be open, but you can only have 25% capacity. Well, 25% capacity doesn't get you anywhere. Any of us that have been in retail business or anybody in business at all understand that you better be open and you better be roaring in order to make these things. We all work in such a small profit margin. It really has been one of those things that just kind of drives you crazy. Our retail sales go down, but the cost of operation doesn't go down, right? I mean, you still have a high cost of operation with PPP. That helped an awful lot, but it's just for a very short window. The answer to all this, I mean, honestly, guys, I'm interested to see with next week in our package of what we think we can do next, but it has to, if we're going to prioritize things, let's really prioritize things. I'd rather see something, and please don't be offended by this. I want a messaging bill that handles the economy with a message they need to hear, not another message directed to what could possibly happen on November the 3rd. I think we waste a lot of time, and people are sick and tired of being sick and tired with what we do down here. So when I look at, 175,000 people, but the restaurants are shut down, Pennsylvania, we're talking about great numbers of people. They're going to be unemployed, not until we get a cure for the China flu, but forever. They're just not going to be able to reopen. Now, there's a piece. Now, Tommy, you talked about your piece with problem solvers. I want to look at that, but also I'm on a piece called the Restart Act with Congressman Golden and also Senators Young and Senator Bennett. Now, we have half the Senate is on board with this. So any of my colleagues, there's over 100 of us on this right now, look at the Restart Act, ask your ledge team to take a look at Restart Act, see if you want to be on it, because what it does, it provides a loan for up to 6 months of operating expenses. Part of the loan would be forgivable with a much longer repayment of 7 years. But Mr. Rodrigue, because you represent so many people, and I got to tell you, all of you independent owners, I know how tough it is for you right now. I mean, my business was shut down for 4 months. We were considered a non-essential business, which was okay for, that's a great term, but for the people that work there, they don't like to look at themselves as not essential. Mr. Rodrigue, all these different programs that we have, and it has to be an economic package, what is it that you would see that we could do next that would really be helpful?
I truly believe if we could get a restaurant-specific bill passed, that would be spectacular. We support the Senate version of Restaurants Act because of its inclusiveness. But we really need any lifeline that can be given to us at this point. There are so many that are in dire need and running out of time. So another round of PPP would be great. And with similar restrictions or parameters as the last, your Restart program would be spectacular as well. Anything that can give us an opportunity to be capitalized to bring people back to work and give us staying power. We need staying power to the point in time where capacities are back to where they need to be in a safe fashion for employees and customers, and it's going to take all the help we can get. And so we would definitely support your program.
Okay, that's great. Hey, Mike, thanks for having this hearing. Let's all try to get together to help these folks.
Thank you very much. The gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Davis, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And although I'm not a member of this committee, let me thank you for giving me the opportunity to wave on. I think all of us agree that the restaurant industry is one of the hardest hit industries as a result of the dual health and economic crisis that we face. The workers, the owners, the suppliers, everybody, all have actually lost. And of course, in Chicago, where I live, restaurants undergird many entire communities, and especially in my district. I represent downtown Chicago, and you don't come to Chicago and not go to the Loop to see what the restaurants are like and to have a meal. I represent Chinatown, Greek Town, Old Town, Oak Park, Forest Park, River Park, Bronzeville. All of these communities are restaurant known. People go to them specifically to engage in their restaurants. And so the restaurants are absolutely essential. The traditional soul food eateries are basically wiped out. Places like MacArthur's or Wallace's Catfish Corner. Lowry's has just announced that they are going to close. So Bronzeville, Ukrainian Village, restaurant places. The workers who used to make minimum wage now, of course, have no wage. They have no other place to turn but to their government. Where else can they go? They don't have savings, stocks, or 401ks. And as Professor Javaron indicated and mentioned, one young worker from Chicago named Kamani was paid in cash, which both lessened his take-home pay and excluded him from unemployment benefits. Of course, I'm a co-sponsor of Earl Blumenauer's Restaurant Act, enthusiastically co-sponsor it. The House has passed critical policies to help restaurants and workers over 4 months ago. The enhanced employee retention tax credit, new economic impact payments, expanded paid family and medical leave, and critical child care tax credits. Yet the Republican Senate leadership has refused to help restaurants and workers. Professor Javerman, your testimony spoke about the particular vulnerability of restaurant workers given their history of poor wages and lack of benefits. Can you speak about the policies that would be most helpful to workers in the immediate future? And could you articulate for us what really happened to Kamani?
Yes, thank you, Congressmember Davis. Kimani Hill is a restaurant worker who was paid $5 an hour plus a few dollars in tips in cash, still working at the same restaurant, 12-hour shifts, and wasn't able to access unemployment insurance, as you said, went back to work and is fighting every day with customers, asking them to wear masks, and then not getting tips as a result. And unfortunately, in August, while he was at work on one of these 12-hour shifts, his mother passed away from COVID, which is, as an African-American man, Chicago's Black community has been particularly hard hit by the coronavirus. And without access to healthcare and supports, Kimani was not able to help his mother. The thing is that these crazy and horrific stories are not going unnoticed by employers. And so when you ask what can be done, it is great that you're thinking about saving restaurants through the Restaurants Act and through tax credits. I hope that you are thinking about, and many of you have spoken about this, how we can come together and think about both employers and workers' needs. And for workers, we applaud the House for passing the Raise the Wage Act. Need that to become federal law so that people aren't paid $2 an hour. We applaud you for passing 600. We need more of that. But there's more that workers and employers can do together, particularly providing employers with tax credits for doing the right thing right now.
Okay, the gentleman's time expired. We'll now go to Ms. Tu. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you. And I'd like to address these questions to Christine Ha. Christine Ha, your story is truly inspirational, and I'm speaking as not only a member of the Ways and Means Committee, but also as a member of the House Small Business Committee, and also as chair of the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus. With your restaurant, you've been able to expose people to a culturally diverse cuisine. You are a woman-owned business, and you're blind, and yet you have gotten awards galore. It's frankly utterly amazing. And so, as a member of the House Small Business Committee, I'd like to ask, I am a member of in fact, chair of the House Subcommittee on Oversight in the Small Business Committee. And so we're dedicated to finding solutions for small businesses and also, of course, to help restaurants survive in this pandemic. I've heard from countless small businesses who struggled to secure relief funding in the midst of the pandemic that was crushing their livelihoods. And we take that feedback to improve the process for getting the financial help that our small businesses need. They talk about big banks who suddenly became unresponsive after years of business dealings with them, to technical errors that caused businesses to have to file and refile their applications. And these kinds of barriers prevented small businesses from accessing the relief that Congress intended. Now, I noted with interest in your testimony that you said you applied for 10 financial relief programs, but you only received 2. Can you talk about your experience in applying for these programs and what happened? Which programs were the most frustrating to apply to? Did you have to reach out to multiple banks to find a lender that was willing to accept your application? And were you able to receive assistance from the Small Business Administration, such as the Economic Injury Disaster Loan and Grant Program? The grant program was supposed to give you money straight out. So I'm wondering what your process was in securing financing for your restaurant.
Yes, thank you, Congresswoman. I will speak back to initially when all of the federal relief programs were out. We did apply for the EIDL. Initially, that was a confusing process where I think the website was just crashing. We weren't able to log on, so I missed out on that initial round. The PPP, similar. The application process was very cumbersome. I reached out following the rules to the bank that we were banking at, and then did not hear back for a long time. I was hearing from other restaurateurs that I know that they said just apply to any bank. So we were applying to multiple banks. We were denied by many of them because they said we've already initially applied to our first bank. Fortunately, in the second round of funding, we did receive, not through the bank that we bank at, but through a lender of one of our equipment. So we received that. I've applied to all sorts of grant programs that I am eligible for, being a women-owned business, being in Texas. I spent a lot of hours doing that, and this is mainly just to pass on the money to my staff to make sure that they can put food on their tables. I'm not on salary. I don't take any owner's disbursements since we first opened. Everything is for the business and for the staff. The one grant I did receive was from the Texas Restaurant Association for $2,500, which a large portion of that we did use to give back to the community and provide meals for first responders and just feeding the county hospitals and clinics, because one of the core values at the Blind Goat is to commit to helping others around you. So I think, as a community, we're all kind of fighting for the survival together. So, the process has been definitely difficult. There's a lot of rules that are very difficult to understand. As, just a business owner, we're dealing with so many things, operating our business, making sure our staff's okay, trying to apply for financial relief. So, I mean, that's kind of been my personal process with doing all of this. And of course, because I am visually impaired, I'm using computers that require screen readers, so that, oftentimes my application process takes even longer as I have to navigate different applications with the screen reader.
Thank you for that. Let me ask a question also. As a chair of the Asian Pacific American Caucus, there are those that those businesses that have had to shoulder xenophobic fears that drive customers away. I know that in my district in Southern California, several Asian grocery stores and restaurants were the subject of racist smear campaigns. Did you experience any of that?
As a business, I did not notice it, but my staff, many of them who are Asian American, said that they have experienced that in their own neighborhoods or coming into work. So I wouldn't say I have directly. Our sales did drop, but it's hard to say. I'm not sure if it's due to just COVID and people not eating out, or if it's because we serve primarily Asian food. That one, Congresswoman, I'm not sure I can completely answer 100%.
Thank you. The gentlelady's time has expired. Mr. Estes, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for our witnesses for joining us today. Shutdowns, regulations, and service industry downturns have impacted the financial stability of restaurants across the country, including those in my district in Kansas. And one example in my district is an event venue outside of Wichita that has faced unique hardships during this pandemic. Wichita Union Stockyards opened in December of 2019. The owners, Mike and Tina, farmed their entire lives to save enough money to open an exceptional country western venue for our region. The impact of the pandemic on them was uniquely terrible because they were so new. The CARES Act funding that we passed did not address their specific situation. I worked tirelessly to try to find ways to assist them through these difficult times. And Kansas restaurants in general are facing challenges as well. In the month of August, 86% of Kansas restaurants say their total dollar sales volumes were lower than a year ago, with sales down an average of 28%. Even more discouraging is that 78% say the conditions were worse in August than in July. Restaurants and event venues, such as the Wichita Union Stockyards, are facing unique challenges, which is why we need to work to bring targeted relief to restaurant employees and owners. Unfortunately, my Democrat colleagues would like to burden restaurants by doubling the minimum wages and imposing even more regulations. Time and again, we've heard from the Congressional Budget Office that increasing the minimum wage has a direct and damaging effect on employment in the United States. While restaurant owners are already struggling to navigate oppressive and ever-changing state and local regulations, we cannot pile federal regulations that are one-size-based mandates on small business owners. Instead, I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to pursue bipartisan solutions to keep Americans employed and keep our small and local restaurants open. In August, I co-sponsored H.R. 7481, the Restart Act. This bipartisan legislation would provide long-term loans to restaurants, independent music venues, and other small businesses that operate within the service industry. I even had the opportunity to tour Wave, an independent music venue, to see the challenges they're facing firsthand and how the Restart Act would help them stay in business. This bill is similar to the Paycheck Protection Program, which has proven to be very effective in keeping employees connected with small businesses around the country. It meets the unique needs of restaurants, allowing them to use this loan for payroll, rent, utilities, PPE, and sanitation. With real bipartisan solutions like the Restart Act on the table, it's unreasonable to rush to institute a minimum wage hike and take away tax benefits that will ultimately hurt employees, their families, businesses, and communities. We should be looking at solutions that will keep workers employed and not forcing employers to cut staffing even further. I look forward to working with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to pass legislation that will help American workers, aid local businesses, and rebuild our economy. And with that, let me turn to Mr. Rodrigue. We've heard from other witnesses that minimum wages for restaurant workers is $2 to $4. What's the actual average wage for restaurant workers? And can you walk us through the tip credit and how it makes up the difference between tip to minimum wage and standard minimum wage?
Yes, Congressman. Thank you for the opportunity to clarify that. I think that there is some confusion because there's no one that makes $2.13 an hour. In the event that someone does not receive gratuity, the employer is actually required to make up the difference. So there's no one that makes $2.13 an hour. Anecdotally, I'll tell you that it's an opportunity. And I have a young African-American lady that has been working with me for nearly 18 years. She began when she's 18. She's in her mid-30s now. And at $2.13 an hour, plus her gratuities, her total compensation last year was $103,000. The tipped employees in my restaurant last year averaged well above $40,000 a year in total compensation, and it's a system that they want. And I would say that that's not the exception. That is the normal. This employee began with me as a dishwasher. Then she began making salads. Then she became a busser. Then she became a bartender. For the last 5 or 6 years, she's been a server. And at $2.13 an hour, plus her gratuities, her total compensation again was over $100,000. This is not the exception. This is the norm. In addition to that, I would just like, as a moment of personal privilege, to let you know, it is maybe the most moving thing about my job. I can tell you that there are dozens of people that meet that.
Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Kildee, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this very important hearing on the status of restaurants and of course, other small businesses. Restaurants, in my district, I'm sure this is true everywhere, are really the fabric of our cities and towns. They are the source of character. They're where people meet. It's where people interact. It's more than just, as I think many of the witnesses have said, it's more than just an opportunity to serve food. So when Congress first passed the Paycheck Protection Program, the uptake was pretty significant. But it's not enough, because after the PPP ran dry, we're still in the depths of this pandemic. I know in my own district, in Michigan, in the 5th district, almost 350 restaurants and bars received those PPP loans, accounting for almost 10,000 jobs that were at least temporarily saved. Michigan's phased reopening, which is based on science, based on good data, has moved forward with some limited indoor seating, but obviously in Michigan, unlike other parts of the country, the upcoming winter will absolutely put an end to outdoor seating, leading to an even more stressful future for those restaurants and their workers who have been able to get through because of those modified conditions under which they can remain open. And as we've heard, in the House, we passed the HEROES Act, which included several important tax incentives to make sure workers have a paycheck, but there's been no action in the Senate. And so this is yet to translate to our Main Street restaurants. I've heard from a lot of restaurant proprietors back home throughout my district that the need is still really significant. And many of them right now, even as we speak, are on the verge of collapse. So there's lots of different pieces of this. I've introduced legislation along with Mr. Evans from this committee, the Relief for Main Street Act, that would help provide resources to our very smallest businesses, often small restaurants, especially minority-owned businesses. This funding, distributed through these already established local relief funds, can provide more flexible options for small neighborhood restaurants to do what's needed to keep their doors open. What's needed in Michigan is not necessarily what would be required in Florida to get through this winter. And so we want to create some flexibility. So these local relief funds that would be delivered not in the context of the PPP, where it's a forgivable loan structure, I think would be particularly helpful to very small businesses that might be reluctant to accept even those generous terms of a PPP loan. So I'm curious, particularly from Ms. Bernstein and Ms. Ha, if you could talk about whether or not you've been able to access or heard of other restaurants being able to access local relief funds, and whether or not that is something that you think would be helpful in terms of just getting through the really tough times that I think in a lot of places we're going to see. Ms. Ha.
Yeah, so thank you for that question, Congressman. I will say that currently I'm waiting to hear back from the local government's grant. It was, very enticing because it is a grant and it's relief that will be brought to us immediately if we can get it. So I'm in the process for that. So anything when I hear locally for whether it's state or local or federal aid that is offered that I qualify for or my business qualifies for, I do apply for that. And it is helpful when it's a grant where we don't have to worry so much about figuring out, how to pay it back at an interest rate or anything. Just anything, I think, really to help us just continue to operate and keep our doors open and our staff safe is helpful.
Thank you. And thank you so much for your testimony. Ms. Bernstein, do you have a thought on this before my time expires?
Yeah, I would just say that we generally don't qualify under some of the local grants and opportunities, even though I consider us a very small business with different components to it. We are excluded because we're looked at as a larger business. So that's been kind of an issue for us. And I just want to state that, my desire is all about taking care of our team. It's just without our staff, it is, they have nothing. And we're directing them the best we can to any kind of local opportunities that they can get in organizations or things in our community.
Thank you so much.
Time has expired.
Thank you.
Mr. Evans, you're recognized for 5 minutes. Mr. Evans, are you still with us? We'll skip over to Mr. Snyder and come back to Dwight in a minute.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me?
We can.
Great. Thank you. I want to thank the committee for holding this important hearing. As always, I want to thank the staff for navigating the challenges of holding hearings during these unique times. As this committee has discussed throughout the crisis, we have two distinct challenges facing our country. First, of course, is the public health component of the pandemic, protecting the American people from further spread of the disease while researching and deploying a vaccine and treatment. As our witnesses today have discussed, this crisis poses unprecedented economic challenges as well. Congress passed the CARES Act and subsequent legislation to help small businesses weather this pandemic. And while the House took the forward-looking approach to help the country prepare for a COVID resurgence in the fall by passing the HEROES Act more than 4 months ago, the Senate continues to drag its feet. Few small businesses have faced the brunt of this crisis like our restaurants. They are woven into the fabric of our community and have remained ever adaptive in their attempts to stay afloat throughout the crisis. Many of these restaurants benefited from EIDL and PPP loans, all the while jumping through local and state health regulations that largely dictated reduced capacity. For example, a local brewery and restaurant owner in my district told my office how the efforts Congress took in the spring helped them survive the summer, but aren't nearly enough to get them through the upcoming winter. Unexpectedly cool weather earlier this month put everyone on notice how hard it will be operating during the winter months in places like the northern suburbs of Chicago without outdoor seating. Another constituent who owns and operates a restaurant in downtown Chicago told my office how even with a curbside pickup service that generated more revenue than they were expecting, they were still losing far more money than they were taking in. He said he expects half of the restaurants to close in Chicago. The administration's proposals, like a payroll tax deferment, are not serious solutions. They don't offer these restaurants the help they so desperately need. That Mitch McConnell continues to drag his feet on another relief package is unconscionable. So my questions for our restaurateurs, Ms. Bernstein and Ms. Ha. First off, we're 6 months into the pandemic, and we're likely to have at least another 6 months of challenges. How do businesses like yours plan for such uncertainty? In the face of these challenges, how critical is it for you to get additional federal assistance? And how do you talk to your family, to your employees about the stonewalling we're seeing in getting this assistance to you?
We are if we cannot get any assistance as we move forward, we are going to tighten up everything, shut down as much as possible, and what I would say as close the cash dam. I think that's the only way that we could get through till spring because of the weather that we're going to have. I hope that's not the case because that's going to put a lot of people in need, but we can't continue paying with money that we don't have.
Ms. Ha?
For me, I believe in always running a transparent company. Fortunately, my company is small, so my staff is about, we're at 13 employees. So I've always been transparent with them up front. When I did receive the PPP, I told them that we would be using all of that money to help pass it along to them so that they can put food on their table. I have let them know that this past payroll period is the last of our PPP. So I will be having that talk with them to let them know that they will be seeing decreases in their paychecks in the next 6 months if we do not get additional aid, because that has been our only lifeline. We will have to think about possibly just closing down, which is really hard because I've poured everything into this, and I'm trying to live the American dream that my parents came over here for. So it is something that we are having to consider that is might become a reality.
Well, thank you. I'm sorry, the conversations you're having are difficult conversations that are being held in businesses and communities across our country. This pandemic is an unprecedented challenge. We've never seen anything like it, but it is imperative that we continue to provide the relief like we did with the CARES Act and proposed with the HEROES Act, so businesses like yours can stay open, that we can get to a place where we achieve the recovery, to put our economy back on track, to deliver to our children the future that they all deserve, and to renew the American dream. So I want to thank our witnesses. I'm out of time, but I am so grateful for you sharing your stories here today, for the perseverance you demonstrate in your businesses and associations, and I hope we can find a path to provide the assistance necessary. With that, I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. His time has expired. Mr. Evans, are you back with us? We'll go to the ranking member, Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Chairman. I really want to thank all of our witnesses. Obviously, I'm frustrated with kind of the timing of such a hearing, but it certainly does not diminish from what you have to say. And I'm grateful that you would share your experiences, to hear your entrepreneurial stories. It's amazing. And, part of the frustration that I have is we had such a great economy, in my opinion, and I think factually so, before COVID hit. And so it's been devastating, make no mistake. I would be curious to hear your, Ms. Ha and Ms. Bernstein, your perspective pre-COVID. Would you say that we had a pretty strong economy going?
I would say that we recovered from the wildfires. That was a huge, huge fight. And 2020 should have been, 2019 was amazing. 2020 looked like it was going to be good, especially in our catering, with the amount of opportunities that were coming with events and celebrations. And I think this could have been a record year had it not been. We would have had more employees to be able to hire as well.
Ms. Ha?
For the Blind Goat, it's hard to say because we're fairly new. We've only been open for just a little over a year, but yes, pre-pandemic, we were seeing our sales climbing every month. And so I would say that, we did have a lot of traffic coming through our doors. People were spending money and eating out and enjoying themselves. And so I would say from a personal perspective at the Blind Goat, we were doing well economically.
Very good. Mr. Rodrigue, well, would you say the economy was strong before COVID?
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. I would tell you that literally the first quarter of 2020, excluding the second half of March, was the busiest quarter in the history of our 115-year-old restaurant.
Wow, very good. And now I want to make this simple, if you don't mind, if each of our panelists could just unmute themselves. And I just have a quick yes or no question. And that is, should we extend the payroll protection program as soon as possible? I'll start with you, Ms. Bernstein.
Yes.
Ms. Ha?
Yes.
Mayor Dyer?
Yes.
Mr. Sandoval?
Yes.
And Mr. Rodrigue?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate the direct approach there. Mr. Rodrigue, I'd like to take a moment and perhaps discuss your member restaurants in Nebraska. As you may know, Nebraska's government actually did not institute the statewide shutdown, very strict requirements like several other states. There has been some flexibility, albeit cautious, along the way. I'm wondering if you have found the impact on restaurants across the country has been proportional to the rigidity of lockdowns in respective communities.
So there's definitely been many approaches, but when we're looking at the map of the country, it definitely seems that the more locked down you are, the worse the performance.
Okay, thank you. I would like to add that we have a discharge petition going for the payroll protection program, and I would urge all of my colleagues to sign that. I think signing it is certainly a direct reflection of the input here today, and I just think it is vital. And now I just realized I missed one of our panelists on the payroll protection program. My apologies. Ms. Jaraman, I neglected to ask you on the payroll protection program.
Along with worker protections, yes.
Okay, thank you. My apologies there. Did I miss anyone else? I think that's all of the panelists. But again, I just would urge my colleagues to sign the discharge petition. This is an opportunity to work together to help America. And I think the American people want us to work together. They don't like seeing leaders hold out various things. They want us to help folks all across America. And if it involves more than one vote, let's consider that too. But the fact of the matter is we've got some work to do, and we need to get that done. So again, thank you for your, I think, inspiring entrepreneurial stories. Ms. Ha, I know you mentioned that before the hearing started that you have actually, you're in the middle of a soft opening of a new restaurant. I really commend that bravery. I know you said you signed the lease before COVID hit, so I definitely wish you well. I want everyone to do well. Ms. Jaraman, I am very interested in how we can empower workers. And you know, we live in an economy now where individualism is on the rise. Love to empowering individual workers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, gentlemen. Time has expired. Mr. Panetta, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Thompson. I appreciate this opportunity, and more importantly, I appreciate you holding this crucial hearing that is so important to my district on the Central Coast of California. So thank you for that, and obviously, Ranking Member Smith, thank you as well. As I said, my district is the Central Coast of California: San Benito, Santa Cruz, Santa Clara, Monterey counties. So restaurants, they're a large part of the heart and soul of our communities. And actually restaurants shaped the heart and soul of me and my family, to be frank. My Italian immigrant grandfather was fortunate enough to come to this country and own a restaurant during the war years, World War II. And back then, as you can imagine, child labor laws meant that your children actually worked. And so my father and my grandfather worked in the restaurant. My dad was a dishwasher. My two brothers and I followed in my dad's footsteps in the sense that our first jobs, we were dishwashers as well. Well, I was actually started off as a busboy until I spilled the tartar sauce on a customer, and then they made me a dishwasher. But nevertheless, I started off at probably a restaurant that had the most cheesiest name back in 1981, but actually fit for 1981. It was a restaurant called the Velvet Fox, if you can imagine that. It closed down soon after I worked there, but I guess what do you expect? But obviously I continued to, being from Monterey, in Carmel Valley, I continued to work in restaurants throughout my formative years. And it allowed me to pay my way through college. And in my time in restaurants, though, it made me realize how much opportunity you guys provide for the people of our communities. Yes, you serve our customers, but man, you give everybody in our communities that opportunity. And what we're seeing right now because of COVID-19, we're seeing those opportunities shut down because we're seeing restaurants shut down. And in my district, unfortunately, because of all the restaurants, it's uniquely impacted. We've had restaurants like 99 Bottles in Santa Cruz, Paradise Beach Grill in Capitola, Edis Eunice Bistro in Carmel, Hooligans in Hollister, Holly's Lighthouse Cafe in Pacific Grove, Steamin' Hot Coffee in Moss Landing, and Deachin's Restaurant in Big Sur have all closed their doors permanently. Congress has the ability to help restaurants, and we must do so, and we must do so soon. It's exactly why I support and co-introduced many of the bills you heard about today, the Restaurants Act, Chairman Thompson's Keep the Lights On Act, Rep. Murphy's Jobs Credit Act. I've introduced legislation with my colleague on the committee, Mike Kelly, the Safe Reopening Tax Credit, to help small businesses cover the expenses that help reduce the spread of the virus, such as PPP, plexiglass, and improvements to facilitate social distancing. And of course, there's a HEROES Act, trying to ensure the deductibility for expenses paid with PPP funding. But obviously, we must do more. And for the sake of our restaurants, we must do more. For the sake of opportunity that you provide people in our communities, we must do more. Now, we must do more for our restaurants that are currently open. And one of my restaurants down there in Big Sur, run by Kurt Gaffel, he sent me the following quote. He said, look, additional financial relief from Congress is absolutely essential in the form of a second round of PPP, additional PPP flexibility, provisions, and our tax credits to mitigate the extraordinary negative economic impacts associated with the pandemic. Now, Ms. Bernstein, I'm sure you've heard these types of stories. I'm sure you've heard that restaurants are adapting to survive, but it's very expensive. So, Ms. Bernstein, how helpful would it be to offset some of these costs through tax credits like the Safe Reopening Tax Credit, which would cover expenses such as PPE, plexiglass, and other expenses that can make spaces safer?
It would be incredible. I mean, we have spent so much money in building tables and stanchions and signage and masks and so many things that it would be extremely helpful.
Mr. Rodrigue, what are your thoughts on a tax credit to offset these types of costs?
I think it would be wonderful. As it currently stands, we're operating at reduced capacities, but because of the effort that is going into it, we're spending more money, capital we don't necessarily have in these difficult times, and any tax credit of that nature we would be in full support of. It would be a great help.
I just got a few seconds left, and I'll yield back my time, but I just wanted to say thank you for all that you do, especially now. But once we get through this too, thank you for continuing to provide the opportunity for so many people, not just in my community, but throughout this country. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman's time has expired. Ms. Murphy, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this important hearing and for allowing me to wave onto your committee. And Ms. Ha, I just want to say thank you for sharing your family story. I can relate, as my family and I are also refugees from Vietnam. Your story is an incredible story of grit and the American dream. And I know that you are exhibiting incredible grit right now in this moment. And Congress, I think, has a responsibility to help hardworking Americans through this crisis so that they can continue to pursue their American dreams. 2 weeks ago, we had a hearing about the negative impact of congressional inaction on our constituents and our communities. And today we go a little bit further and we talk about a specific industry that's vital to our economy, and particularly to my district in the Orlando area. This pandemic affects us disproportionately because we're heavily dependent on high-touch industries like tourism and hospitality. And so it's led to pockets of my community with over 15% unemployment. But it is a great pleasure to have the Honorable Buddy Dyer, Mayor of Orlando, here with us today as a witness. You've been an incredible leader of our city since long before I entered politics, and you are doing a great job navigating our community through difficult times. I'm really fortunate to have you as a partner in serving our shared constituents. So thank you for your testimony and your perspective. I'll just cut to the chase and say that Congress needs to act, and it needs to act now. We can have hearings until we're blue in the face and continue to hear the stories of how people and businesses are hurting, but that's not going to change anybody's lives. Legislative action will. And I've said it a lot of times before, but there are two proposals I've worked on that have bipartisan and bicameral support, and I think could be the basis of any compromise. The first one is expanding the employee retention tax credit, and then the other is providing a safe reopening tax credit. We know that the ERTC helps employers keep workers on payroll so that they can continue to receive income and employer-sponsored health insurance, which is critically important in the midst of a pandemic, and that keeps them from having to engage with an onerous unemployment system. And then the economy isn't going to return to normal until people feel safe engaging with businesses. And restaurants are just one very obvious example of small businesses trying to survive and navigate new standards of protocols and of safety. And the witnesses, in response to my colleague from California, laid out that they have been experiencing these unexpected costs that are necessary to safeguard the health of their employees and customers alike. So we should be helping them survive, but also to operate in a safe way. Mayor Dyer, I've highlighted a few tools we have here in Congress to help restaurants, but what are some of the things that Orlando has done to make it easier for restaurants to operate during the pandemic? What tools are you using?
Well, certainly we don't have the resources to give grants or loans, but what we've done is thought outside the box in terms of when they're at limited capacity, how can we help them expand their capacity? So normally you couldn't set up tables in a private parking lot or on a public sidewalk. We've allowed them without going through permitting of any sort to do that. We've also allocated parking spaces that are adjacent to their businesses in two different ways. One is to create a 15-minute time limit so that there can be pickup on premises. And then the other thing we've done is actually let them use the parking spots as what we call parklets. So put tables out into the street. We've allowed them without permitting to do additional signage, set up tents. And in terms of getting back to business, that's what a lot of restaurants do need, is an infusion of capital so that they can take advantage of the other opportunities they have to be able to serve their customers.
Yeah, and in your opening statement, you mentioned PPP and the expanded ERTC as measures that could be helpful. Can you talk about how you think they could be helpful? Because we've heard others propose other ideas like grants and loans and industry bailout funds and state and local aid. Why did you pick those two programs in particular?
I think the ease of accessibility. You've heard some of the restaurateurs talk about having applied to 10 different programs and being accepted into 2. So the tax credits, the tax code already exists. And this is not a criticism of Congress, but sometimes when new programs are set up, trying to weave your way through the new rules or the uncertainty of how you can use the money, when you can use the money, and how you access the money can be difficult.
Well, I certainly agree with you. That's why I've been such a big proponent of the ERTC. And while I understand PPP was helpful, it was a new program that did exactly what you talked about, created a lot of uncertainty and changing standards and regulation for entrepreneurs who are already struggling. Thank you so much for your time, and I yield.
Gentlelady's time has expired. Mr. Horsford, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you for allowing me to participate, Mr. Chairman. I'd assume most, if not all, Americans know that Las Vegas is known as the entertainment capital of the world. Our specialty is hospitality, particularly our top-notch restaurants that people from across the world come to Las Vegas to enjoy. But let's be clear, it's because of the people, the workers, who provide this unparalleled service that nearly 40 million people visit our community. So I want to thank them. And I know this firsthand because before coming to Congress, I'm proud to have ran the Culinary Training Academy, which helped to train thousands of people and the greatest hospitality workers that go on to work in our casinos, our restaurants, and our hotels. But the coronavirus has hit the Southern Nevada economy unlike anything I've ever seen before, resulting in record high unemployment this summer at over 30%. 98% of the culinary union workers were furloughed from their jobs in March, and about 50% are still not working today. That's why I'm so proud that Mario, who worked at Binion Steakhouse for nearly 33 years in downtown Las Vegas, is here speaking on behalf of millions of restaurant workers that are still struggling because the restaurant industry, unfortunately, is one of the last industries to get back on its feet. So Mario, I want to give you the opportunity, as I'm probably one of the last speakers, to tell us why you matter, why restaurant workers matter, why Congress needs to step up and act and protect our citizens from this health and economic pandemic right now. You know, we don't get to hear too often enough from the everyday people who are struggling from this pandemic. And I know that you were a big part of the fight in Nevada to win a historic COVID-19 health and safety law that ensures hospitality workers have stronger protections at work. So congratulations on that new law. It's the first in the nation, and I hope that Congress will act as well. So Mario, I know that you're laid off and are working hard to fight for the right to return to your job. Can you share with us, why is the right to return important? Can you also share with my fellow lawmakers what it means to you personally regarding housing and healthcare, putting food on the table and providing for yourself and your family if Congress does not deliver another stimulus check or extend federal unemployment benefits? And finally, how will my bills, the Worker Health Protection Act to cover COBRA benefits and the Get Back on Your Feet Act to extend unemployment and provide a back to work bonus for those who can safely return to work, what do those bills mean for you?
Well, first of all, as a father, I've provided for a long time for my children. And now I'm a grandfather, and I have my grandchildren, my family still to take care of. And as an employee in the service industry, we make this town. We're the ones that park your car, we serve your food, we make your drink, we serve your drink, we make the bed, you know, so you can come to this town and enjoy it. You know, that's the way we do things here. Service has been my job my whole life. I've made that my career, and I do it really, really well. You come to my restaurant, I make it an experience for you, not just something to eat. It's an experience, you know. But now with this COVID going on, the COVID law in the nation, which it offers enhanced cleaning, hand washing, social distancing, masking, training, contact tracing. That needs to go across the nation, not just here in Nevada. You know, also the right to return to work. You know, this didn't happen because of my fault. It was to no fault of anybody, and I've given my life to my job. You know, I've gone through the ups and downs with my job. Now they should give me the opportunity to go back to a job, because
we agree with you.
Highs and lows. I've been with their highs and lows with them, you know.
So we agree, and we're going to keep fighting. I'm willing to work with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, the House, the Senate, the White House. We have to come together and agree on a compromise. It must put workers first. Yes, it can help small businesses and our restaurants too, but let's do both, and let's do it now.
The gentleman's time has expired. Thank you to all the witnesses for doing just a fantastic job. And thank you for being with us today and sharing your stories. To all the members of the committee and those who waved on for today's hearing, thank you very much. And everyone, please be advised that members have 2 weeks to submit written questions to be answered later in writing. Those questions and your answers will be made part of the formal hearing records. With that, the subcommittee stands adjourned. Thank you.